also fell asleep. They were still snoozing when the captain announced the weather in Fort Worth. When they landed, they met Kate. Joe and Chris spent a cozy night in their old house, which was slowly becoming their home. The next morning, Joe woke up early to take Chris back to the airport. Although he would miss his classes that day, his professors knew and had given him a chance to make up for it later. He made it to work on time, went to his martial arts class, and called Joe FaceTime when he got back home. On December 4th, he received a flood of texts and social media messages from family and friends wishing him a happy birthday. He was finishing class and starting to reply when Joe's FaceTime request came in. The upset look on her face was surprising. "Good morning, honey," he said cheerfully. "Don't good morning me, you did this on purpose," she replied, clearly annoyed. "What?" he asked, playing innocent. "You didn't tell me it was your birthday. If Donna hadn't asked what I got you, I would never have known. I'm really upset. You do so much for me, but I didn't even have a chance to get you a birthday gift because you never told me when it was." Chris chuckled. "You already gave me the best gift of my life when you said you'd marry me. I don't want you spending your money on something for me. I've got you." Her tone softened, but she insisted. "You should have told me. How have we been together this long and I didn't know your birthday?" "Maybe because you never asked," he replied with a teasing smile. She fell silent for a moment. "Now I feel awful, like I've been selfish. All our jokes about age, and I didn't even know when you were born. I feel so foolish." "Now that you know I'm 26, are you going to give the ring back? Am I too old for you?" "Ha! You're not getting rid of me that easily. Besides, I'll be 19 in 2 weeks, so the age difference stays the same. I hate to cut this short, but I have to get to work. Can we FaceTime earlier tonight? I can skip my workout if you call me at 7. Does that work for you?" She agreed, told him she really loved him even if she felt bad, and he reminded her that she was perfect and shouldn't say anything negative about herself. Chris had changed into a snug shirt and shorts to prepare for his call with Joe when the doorbell rang. He opened it to find a lovely young woman holding a cake. "Surprise! Happy birthday!" she exclaimed as she entered. She placed the cake on the table, lit all 26 candles, and smiled, wishing him a wonderful day while offering to help if he needed anything. She winked and said, "My number is on the card if you need anything," before leaving. He was smiling at the Big Devil's food cake with thick chocolate icing, which was his favorite, when a call came through. He thought he might get a flirty message, but when he answered, he saw his sister Kate and Joe on the screen. He felt relieved he wasn't in an embarrassing situation. The 3 girls sang a lively version of "Happy Birthday to You," and then Donna told him to blow out the candles. He did so in one breath, and after they cheered, he thanked them for the surprise. They chatted happily for about half an hour, and then Joe took the phone to another room for a more private talk. "I'm not buying you a gift since you told me not to, but I promise you'll get something special from me at Christmas. Now get ready for a little show before we dive into a serious chat." Life returned to normal class, job, workouts, calls with Joe, and bedtime. She brought something new by texting him multiple times a day. Nothing big, just sweet messages, funny pictures, or memes, but each note made him think of her. He started sending things her way, too, and she always replied right away, making him eager for each notification. This was their routine for the next few weeks. Chris wasn't scheduled to return until December 20th, when the workers had time off until January 5th. He didn't mention her birthday at all, making her feel a little let down, though she knew he would surprise her later when he got back. All her classes had finished for the week, so she was relaxing at home in her pajamas, watching a morning show and eating cereal. When she heard a car in the parking area, she frowned and got up to look out the window. It was a car she didn't recognize, so she hurried to check that all the locks were secure and peeked out again. A large man was getting something from the trunk of the car. He tapped the window as he walked by and approached the house. The car started to back out. Joe focused on the man, who was walking confidently toward the front door. Why was he there? And why was the car leaving? She grabbed her phone and got ready to call for help. "Chris!" she shouted when she finally recognized him. He smiled at her excitement while unlocking the door. As he stepped inside, Joe rushed to him, nearly knocking him over with her enthusiastic hug. "What are you doing here?" she exclaimed. "Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Amy Jo. "Happy birthday to you," he sang, wrapping his arms around her. "You came back for my birthday? Oh, Chris, I love you so much, thank you. I thought you had forgotten." "You're joking. Would I ever forget the most special day of my life? Forget the day I met my lovely girl from the Ouachita? Forget the birthday of my fiancé? No way will I ever forget that day and night. Happy 19th birthday, my dear. Oh, Chris, I love you so much. Now let's get you all set up and I'll take you shopping for the perfect present to go with your gift from me. After that, we can go eat somewhere nice." "But how will I know the perfect present if I don't know what your gift is?" she asked. "After you get ready, I'll show you your gift. It doesn't match your cozy pajamas." She finally let go of the wall, grabbed his hand, and pulled him upstairs, her golden hair bouncing as she giggled. She rushed into the bathroom. He sat on the bed, imagining her reaction to the gift he held. She came back in less than 30 minutes, looking beautiful in a black skirt and a white blouse. "Does it match this?" she asked with a smile. He whistled, pulled a nicely wrapped box from behind him, and handed it to her. She squealed with joy, hopped around and tore off the wrapping. The box had a name on it that she didn't recognize, but it looked like a jewelry box to her. She paused, looked at Chris, and then opened the lid. She gasped and looked back at him. "Chris, is this what I think it is?" she asked with excitement in her voice. "If you think it's a necklace and matching earrings with your birthstone, then yes, it is," he replied. "I thought this was a giant ruby. With diamonds," she exclaimed. "That is your birthstone, but it's not giant. The teardrop ruby in the necklace is a ½ carat, and the ones in the earrings are a ¼ carat. Try them on." She lifted the necklace from the box, held it over her hand, and asked, "Is the metal silver? It kind of looks like it, but not really." "No, it's white gold. Here, let me help you put it around your neck, and you can wear the earrings as we go find the perfect dress or whatever you want." "Wow, it looks great with this blouse." She hung the earrings and walked to the large mirror in the living room. "Oh, Chris, this is too much. In the past, I got a new pair of shoes, or maybe some cute socks. This is just amazing." "Actually, it's 2 birthday presents since I didn't get you one last year. Besides, the necklace and earrings aren't as amazing as the beauty wearing them." They hurried down the stairs and out to the garage, ignoring the chilly wind. Surprisingly, she found a white dress with ruby red trim at the second store they visited. The sales clerk admired her earrings and necklace, then praised the dress that complemented her jewelry beautifully. Chris felt the outfit she wore drew a bit too much attention, but he noticed it made her feel confident, so he said nothing. They went out for an early dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant and then started heading home. Joe leaned into him, resting comfortably, but he soon realized she had more on her mind than just a simple cuddle. At one point, he had to gently move her from his lap to keep focus on driving safely through the busy traffic. As they got closer to home, Joe cheerfully said, "No more traffic ahead." She began playfully teasing him, hinting at wanting to try something new. With a playful tone, Chris asked, "Did you pick this up from one of your online videos?" She laughed and said, "I'll show you when we get home." As soon as they reached their street, Joe started her little demonstration, making Chris smile. He parked the car in the garage and relaxed for a few minutes, letting her do her thing while they shared an intimate moment. After a bit, Chris suggested, "How about we try something else now?" With a playful grin, they both adjusted their positions to make themselves more comfortable. Joe moved closer to him and they shared some kisses, enjoying each other's company. The atmosphere was filled with warmth and affection as they embraced. The rest of the evening was a mix of laughter and closeness, and afterward, Joe nestled against him, feeling content. As they caught their breath, Joe whispered, "That was the first time we've been so close like that in the car." Chris smiled, feeling just as content as they enjoyed the peaceful moment together. "I like this. We should try it in the truck too, and in the old car in the barn." When they finally got dressed and headed to the house, Chris was amazed by the lovely vintage Christmas decorations and warm amber lights the girls had put around the porches, windows, and doors. He couldn't believe he hadn't noticed all this when he first arrived. Even more surprising, there was an 8-foot tree set near the window between the living and dining rooms, covered in tinsel, ornaments, vintage amber lights, and a shiny star. The decorations matched the time when the house was built, and there were other pretty decorations carefully placed throughout the dining and living rooms, above the fireplace and along the staircase. How did I miss all this? I must be clueless. Or maybe I was just focused on my beautiful fiancé. Either way, I'm embarrassed but really impressed. These decorations are amazing. Jo felt proud when she heard his reaction, and even more when he praised their choices and the way they had arranged everything. She shared how they had researched Christmas traditions from the early 1900s and how they found the different pieces online. She sheepishly mentioned using the travel card he gave her, but she believed these were decorations they could cherish forever. He kissed her forehead, nose, and lips, telling her they were perfect, no matter the cost. She smiled brightly. Donna was in Nashville and Kate was in Seattle, so they had the whole house to themselves for 3 entire days. Not wanting to give their activities away to the security cameras inside, Chris turned off all the indoor ones but left the outside cameras on. On the sunny and warm 3rd day, he needed to turn off the backyard and barn cameras for a few hours while they enjoyed the outdoors and sunbathed in a private spot. Besides getting some sun, they had the chance to listen to the winter birds, including mourning doves and the white-winged doves that were coming in from Mexico. The mourning doves made a soft cooing sound, while the white-winged doves had a stronger but pleasant call. Many pairs of both kinds were nesting in the live oak trees on the property. Lying next to each other, feeling the warm breeze, watching and enjoying each other's presence, reminded Chris that while video calls are nice, nothing beats being together in person. Being close allows for so many more feelings, touch, taste, and smell that create a wonderful experience. Despite being better than nothing, toys were nowhere near as fulfilling as the real thing when it came to feeling close to someone. Being apart for 3 weeks since Thanksgiving made them eager to be together again, and they fully enjoyed their 5 days alone. They lived on each other's company and the food Jo had, not leaving the house until Mom, Dad, Diane, and Donna arrived at noon on the 23rd. They brought a car full of presents to add to the pile already under the tree set up by Donna, Kate, and Jo. Chris had bought so many gifts in Colorado that he had them shipped to Fort Worth. They arrived in the afternoon and filled up the living room with gifts surrounding the tree. It promised to be a delightful and generous gift exchange. Jo felt a bit shy seeing so many gifts with her name on them, more than all the presents she had ever received before combined. That evening, they went to an early church service at Trinity Episcopal Church, where the Alexanders heard Jo sing carols for the first time. They were not surprised when the music director and the priest asked her to join the choir as they were leaving. After church, they attended the Beck's Christmas Eve party for fun and dancing, then returned to Chris's place to open just one present. Chris suggested that everyone open their gifts from him at the same time and he would do the same. They joked and then agreed. "Oh my gosh, a Jungle Print ski suit!" Diane exclaimed just before Donna shouted, "Mine is purple and white houndstooth. I've never seen anything like it." Jo was opening hers carefully, but when she heard the excitement from the others, she quickly tore the wrapping. "Look at this, mine has solar systems and stars on a purple background." Deborah added to the joy, saying, "Mine is burgundy with cool shapes. Oh goodness, Chris, where did you find all these?" Instead of answering, he shared a look with his dad, and they all held up their suits together. "Mine is Tennessee orange and white, and Dad's is Tennessee white and orange. Pretty cool, right? Now will be easy to spot on the slopes." "Jo knows where I got them a little store in Golden. Remember how much you liked the ski suit in the window?" Jo nodded, excited. "I went back after you left in August, asked about a special order, and they offered a great deal if I bought 5. I said I wanted 7, so they made the deal even better, and we chose patterns that are rarely seen on the slopes. Everything was protected from water, and they even threw in ski masks for fun. These unique gifts brought hugs and kisses from Mom and his sisters, a big hug from Dad, and a fun little fashion show from Jo later that night. When they got to their room, Jo excitedly presented a special birthday gift. She wanted him to open it right away. At first, he was puzzled by the colorful set of 5 silk boxers that were clearly for him. But then he noticed the 3 cute pairs of underwear and 2 matching sets, which left him confused. She insisted that he try on all 5 pairs, matching them one by one, and slowly, he began to understand. The next morning, they excitedly dug into their pile of presents. By the end of it all, everyone had lots of nice winter clothes, perfect for skiing and enjoying life in Park City. Jo received her own skis, poles, and boots. The ladies got lovely jewelry, while Chris and Dan received new bird hunting gear. The other gifts for Kate, her parents, and the Beck family would go with them to Utah on the 26th. Beck Construction's private jet took them to a special terminal at Salt Lake City Airport, and the Beck family picked them up in an SUV they kept at the ski lodge. They stuffed their luggage and gifts in the back and squeezed together for the 45-minute drive up the mountain. At the Beck's home, Kate and her parents, Stephanie and Ed, were waiting. They exchanged warm greetings, sharing hugs and kisses. Chris received a big hug from both Kate and Stephanie. However, when Kate excitedly unwrapped her ski suit in TCU purple, Jo looked a bit unhappy. They woke up early to enjoy a traditional Southern breakfast prepared by a cook the Becks hired for the holiday, then hit the slopes when they opened at 9. They enjoyed lunch at the Ellisons' place, right by the slopes, then skied again until the trails closed. The bright ski suits helped them spot each other, even if there were many young men around helping the girls near the lifts. That evening they had dinner and danced in Park City, but returned to the lodge by 11. This routine continued from the 27th through the 30th. The women took the last afternoon to go shopping, letting the three men try some challenging ski trails that the women were not keen on. They skied the morning of the 31st, but spent their afternoon getting ready to celebrate the arrival of 2020 at a busy club. For the first time, Jo appeared a bit shy when they entered the lively place. "What's wrong?" Chris asked, leaning close so she could hear over the noise and music. "It reminds me of the place Kate's cousin took us. It's different, but the crowd and the noise are similar." "It's okay. I'm here with you tonight," he assured her. "Please don't leave me alone," she begged. She seemed shy, which made him think she had her own struggles to face. "Have you started seeing the counselor?" he asked gently. "No, Donna, Kate, and I have been too busy with exams. We plan to start in January after you go back to Colorado." Kate, Donna, and Diane wore bright dresses that caught the eyes of many. Jo had on a jumpsuit, and even though she was sitting close to Chris, several young men asked her to dance. She politely said no to all except her fiancé. He happily joined her on the dance floor, bouncing to the fast songs and holding her close during the slow ones. They left their drinks untouched as they enjoyed each other's company. Sandy, Deborah, and Stephanie also wore bold outfits that attracted attention from older men. Many stopped by the table to chat. Both sets of parents and the Becks spent a lot of time dancing, but someone always stayed back to keep an eye on the drinks. It might have been too much, but it made the girls and their dads happy. Chris watched over his sisters and Kate, who came to dance near him during some classic rock songs, but enjoyed dancing with others too. When the band took a break, they talked about whether to celebrate the new year there or watch the fireworks at the Ellisons' deck. They decided to dance until 11:20, then head to the Ellisons. When the band came back, Diane interrupted Jo's plan to pull Chris back out for another song. "No way! You've had the best dancer all night! I want my turn before we leave." She took Chris's hand and led him to the dance floor. Chris was a good dancer, but he admired how well his sisters and Jo moved to the music. Next, he danced with Donna, then his mom joined him for a waltz. Kate took him back to the floor just as the band started playing Imagine by John Lennon. Jo was finishing up a dance with Ed Ellison, and after a quick chat, started dancing again. Chris noticed Jo was close to Ed, but Kate was very attached to him. He tried to hold her at a comfortable distance, yet she clung to him, making him feel a bit awkward. Jo was very beautiful, but Kate held her own. The same went for his sisters, his mom, Stephanie, and Sandy. He was sitting at a table with really attractive women, and he knew that every man around was probably jealous. He could tell by the annoyed look from one guy who had danced with Kate a few times, but kept his distance. By chance, Jo and Ed were on the other side of the busy dance floor. Kate leaned back in his arms and gave Chris a flirty smile while getting closer to him. Being taller than Jo, she pressed against him, and he felt a rush of feelings from their closeness. Kate moved against him playfully and looked at him with bright eyes, holding him even tighter. "Thank you for that," she said softly when the song ended. "I've always wanted to know what it would feel like to spend a moment with you, and now I have a sense of it. I won't do that again. But if you and Joe ever break up, call me first, okay? He smiled and replied, You'll be the first to know if that happens. When they made their way back across the crowded floor, Joe was with Trey. His sisters were dancing with two new guys. His mom was with Ed, and Sandy was with a neighbor. Stephanie took his hand and led him to a quieter spot on the floor. Now show me some of those dance moves, she said, as a song played. Stephanie had a fuller figure than Kate, but she moved with grace and swayed close to him. He guided her through some turns and spins, which allowed him to show off his skills while keeping a bit of space between them. It was 11:10 when they returned to the table just as Joe finished her water. Chris waited a moment, then grabbed her and danced away while Elvis's loving voice filled the air. The song was perfect for a close dance, and at the end, Joe stood on her toes and declared, I love you, Christian Alexander. And soon it was time to leave. The fireworks were amazing from the deck. As Chris said, they look better when they're not right overhead. Everyone else stayed to celebrate the new year, but they shared a sweet kiss and left early, saying they were too tired to stay up longer. Chris used his app to call an Uber driver who was waiting nearby until he saw Joe. He stepped out quickly, greeted everyone, opened the back door, and rushed back to his seat. Chris repeated the address just to make sure. He adjusted the mirror slightly so he could see Joe better and began to drive. Do I need to keep an eye on you when the Ellison women are around? Joe asked, frowning. It seems like both of them are interested in you. Should I watch Ed then? He definitely seems to notice you, he replied. Joe giggled. Maybe you should. He was polite, but he made an effort, and it was clear he thought I was attractive. At least he wasn't too forward like his daughter was with you. She promised not to do that again, but she made me promise to call her if you ever break up with me, he joked. Then she won't be getting a call, Joe said as she moved a little closer to him. Right now, I'm worried about our driver, Chris whispered to her. He looks like he's really interested in you. Too bad I'm not wearing something fun I could keep him guessing all the way back, she whispered back. And just so you know, Ed isn't the only one I danced with who showed some interest. Oh, I've seen how Trey and Dad react to you, he teased. You managed to attract a lot of attention. And yet, my heart is set on only one, she whispered playfully. The next morning, their excitement about having the house to themselves led to playful teasing at breakfast. Too tired, was what you said when you left before everyone else. Too tired to carry these? Donna teased, holding a small pair of Joe's underwear in front of her. Joe, acting innocent, tilted her head and said, I don't recognize those. Maybe someone dropped them while doing laundry. She pretended to be confused by the laughter, but the twinkle in her eyes gave her away. Deborah joined in by holding up a large sock, asking, What about this size 14 sock? Chris simply hugged Joe and replied, I took off my boots to keep the carpet clean. I must have dropped my sock on my way upstairs after we had a long night. Now that we've settled that, where's breakfast? Chris and Joe were flying back commercial the next day, so they enjoyed a full day of skiing, went riding on two of the Ellison snowmobiles, had a light dinner, and took a lovely sleigh ride after it got dark. It was a clear, cold winter night, with a thin crescent moon and countless stars shining above. They cuddled under a blanket provided by the driver, quietly appreciating the feel of a horse pulling a sleigh through tall trees on a soft layer of sparkling snow. Their flight on the 2nd took off just after 10, so they woke up early. Chris was trying to arrange a ride to SLC when Dan and Trey came by. We're driving you right after we have a good breakfast. There won't be any lines today, visitors won't leave until the 4th or 5th, and business travelers won't go until Sunday or Monday. We'll get you there by 8:30, which is plenty of time, Trey assured him. They had time for breakfast, shared hugs and goodbyes, and wished each other safe travels. There were no lines at the TSA checkpoint. The plane had plenty of seats available, and the flight was calm. Both managed to sleep. They landed and got into their lift at 12:50, with Chris using the keypad to open the gate at 1:30. By 1:37, they were relaxing at home and stayed that way until hunger finally hit them around 7:30 that evening. They put on robes, ate microwave meals, and hurried back upstairs, leaving their robes behind at the top of the stairs. After a cozy moment together, they lay facing each other when Chris casually asked, So when are we thinking about getting married? Joe blinked, looking a bit surprised, and looked away. What do you mean? We haven't picked a date yet. Then what are you, my mom, Sandy Beck, and my sisters planning for July, my birthday party? Chris, honey, we aren't really making plans right now, but your mom says it takes a lot of time to plan a wedding, so we've been doing a bit of early planning. And that planning group thinks July would be good? Well, you'd be done with classes, and Trey says you can have 2 weeks off after that, so it's probably the best time. But we weren't going to go further without a set date, I promise. Joe, promise me my bossy, sneaky mom isn't pushing you into this or trying to manipulate you. Sigh. Not really. I mean, I would marry you in front of a judge tomorrow, or we could even fly to Las Vegas and have a fun ceremony if you wanted. I don't need a big wedding, I just want to be your wife. But she makes a big church wedding sound so lovely. It's nice to picture myself as Cinderella. As beautiful as you looked in your fancy dress, I think you'll make Cinderella look plain. Oh, honey, you're so sweet. Let me show you how much I care for you, she said as she gently kissed him. Even though Chris said he wanted to stay bare for the day, they ended up getting dressed the next morning. They enjoyed coffee and breakfast together before heading outside to discuss their plans. The greenhouse should go here by the barn where there's electricity, he suggested. But it would look nicer and be protected from the north wind if we put it over here, she replied. You're right. Should we move the garden too, or keep it where it is and expand later? Let's wait to expand until you move in full time. I did my best to keep the garden watered and picked while you were away last summer. They continued planning together, deciding where to plant the primrose jasmine for more privacy, where to put flower beds, and which flowers to choose. Finally, they tackled the big question Chris had in mind, whether to pave a space for a covered outdoor kitchen that included a grill and a refrigerator along with his barbecue pit. She seemed unsure, so he explained his idea in detail and asked for her input on designing the kitchen. You've thought about this for a while, haven't you? She asked a bit suspiciously. Honestly, I want a gazebo with a hot tub nearby. It could have shutters to keep warm air in so we could use it all year right here in this empty spot, he said, pointing to a spot close to the house. So you've really been planning this, haven't you? Chris said playfully. Are you thinking about using the hot tub freely? If so, count me in. Anything else you'd like, Princess Joe? He added with a smile. She twirled a strand of hair around her finger and smiled back, saying, Well, I dream of a swimming pool next to the gazebo, but not until we're living here full time. It'll be casual unless Kate or her mom come to visit. And when my family comes to town, he added mockingly. Before they knew it, Sunday afternoon had arrived, and Chris had to go. They had accomplished a lot in 3 days, planning the layout for the kitchen and gazebo, and sketching out ideas for a pool for later. They even enjoyed a movie and some dancing nearby. They felt inseparable until they had to part ways due to their other responsibilities. He tried to convince Joe to spend the week with him in Denver before classes started again, but she was busy with an online class and believed she could finish most of it before school resumed. But not if she was distracted by him all day and night. Besides, to be honest, she could use a break from his energy and her own. Classes hadn't started again, so Chris went to work at 8. He wanted to be there when the team arrived at the job site. The project manager had a coffee truck ready, so the first hour was spent enjoying coffee, chatting, and planning for the week. No big storms were expected. They had a full team, and all needed supplies were available, so the beginning of 2020 looked promising. Chris enjoyed the diverse programming and calm news on the local NPR station. He kept it tuned in while driving around town. His days were busy with longer work hours, workouts, and quality video chats with Joe from 9 to 10 each night. On January 9th, he left the gym after an intense martial arts session and headed home. An interesting talk was happening among some medical scientists and the host about a new pneumonia-like infection reported by the WHO in Wuhan, China. They discussed whether this new illness was a type of pneumonia, a new strain of flu, or a new kind of virus. The host asked if people in America should worry since the cases were limited to Wuhan province. The scientists explained how such diseases spread from person to person, and they acknowledged that with global travel, it would likely reach other places soon. The big question was, how dangerous is it? No one had an answer. Chris was passionate about engineering, but history was his favorite subject in high school and college. He was knowledgeable about past worldwide epidemics, including the severe H1N1 flu pandemic of 1918, sometimes wrongly called the Spanish flu. The first case was actually reported in Kansas, but soon about 1/3 of the Earth's population was affected, and somewhere between 50–100 million people died. That was a huge loss for the world's population at that time. The Spanish flu wasn't as deadly as the bubonic plague from the 1340s, but neither of those pandemics occurred in a world as crowded and connected as it was in 2020. He felt a little worried and promised to stay updated on this new illness. Classes resumed, and he returned to his regular school and workout routine, keeping his evenings after 9 free for Joe. They loved their video chats, but longed to be together. Chris requested a week off in March to match the CU and TCU spring breaks the week of March 9th, planning to surprise her with a weekend trip for Valentine's Day. News about the new coronavirus found in Wuhan started to appear in mainstream media, and the CDC closed some airports to international arrivals after cases were reported in Japan and Taiwan as well. On January 21st, the first confirmed case appeared in the United States. A Chinese scientist revealed that the illness was spreading from person to person, and many were sadly losing their lives. By January 23rd, China announced that the Wuhan area was under quarantine. By the end of January, it was clear that the disease had spread well beyond China, reaching the USA too. The American government and officials from the CDC reassured the public that there was no immediate danger for those who hadn't traveled abroad, and suggested that the virus might not be very serious after all. However, in early February, things took a turn for the worse. The World Health Organization, WHO, declared a global health emergency, urging limits on international travel. The United States also declared a public health emergency. The Chinese admitted that more people were dying than during the SARS outbreak a few years earlier, and that the spread of the illness was not under control. By late February, the U.S. warned that we were approaching a pandemic, and a cruise ship returned with several infected passengers. Chris was closely following the news. In late January, he raised his concerns with Carlos, the project manager. Carlos believed him and insisted that he inform Trey. Chris did just that, as well as telling his parents. Both construction companies had a stockpile of respirators and N95 masks for use in dusty or potentially harmful conditions. Trey and Dan attempted to order more supplies, only to find out that there was a growing shortage worldwide. Their suppliers provided what they had available, but cautioned that more wouldn't be available for some time. Chris decided to take a vacation and booked a flight to Fort Worth for early morning on Friday, February 14th. By 10:30 that morning, he was in an Uber heading to the airport, carrying a box of Swiss chocolates and a pair of diamond earrings for Joe, as his mom suggested she would appreciate them. He had arranged for flowers to be delivered earlier that morning, and he saw a picture of them when he turned his phone back on at the airport. When Joe didn't return an hour after her classes ended, Chris sent her a message with a heart, asking what she was doing. She replied that she was out eating with friends and sent a picture with her and several others. He responded with a heart and a quick selfie by the stairs. Just after, he received a call from her. With excitement, she exclaimed, "You're really home?" "I'm standing here at the bottom of the stairs," he replied playfully. "I'll be right there," she shouted. "Drive safely," he reminded her before she hung up. She arrived safely but seemed a bit let down when she saw he was dressed, holding the box of chocolates and a wrapped gift. Chris presented the gifts, but she ignored them in favor of hugging him tightly and pulling him toward the stairs. "We can open gifts later. You promised me something fun, and I want it now." Her little dress was on the chair before he could take off his pants, so she quickly took off his shirt, pushed him down on the bed, and crawled on top of him excitedly. She leaned closer, and they shared a passionate kiss. What followed was a good while spent with each other, filled with affection and closeness. Then a little time resting together, and more loving moments afterward. Feeling a bit tired, they chatted for a while, enjoyed some playful time in the shower until the water turned cool, and then got dressed. She seemed to want more of his attention than ever, and he found himself feeling a strong connection with her, unlike anything he had experienced before. "Finally!" Donna exclaimed as they started down the stairs. She and Kate were waiting at the bottom with eager looks on their faces. "I thought I wouldn't get to see my big brother today. Joe, you need to share him with your friends." Joe replied playfully, "I've missed my fiancé for 6 weeks. I'll let you both have a few moments with him, but he will be back upstairs with me soon." Chris was greeted with warm, tight hugs and kisses from both his sister and Kate, who were really happy to see him. "Joe left her gifts on the chair," he said, a bit disappointed. "I don't think she liked them that much, but I have something for both of you in the drawer of that little table. Maybe you'll like yours better." They squealed with excitement and rushed to the table. Joe had her hands on her hips. "I didn't say I didn't like them. I just had other things on my mind. If you want to give them to me now, go get them." He chuckled and waited for the girls to grab their gifts from the drawer. "Joe, you have one too!" Kate exclaimed. They stood close together to open their boxes at the same time. The personalized anklets with their names in beautiful writing caught their attention, and they started squealing in delight when they realized what they were. He received cheerful hugs from both girls and a special embrace from his fiancée. "I'll give you the other gifts after dinner," he whispered. She hugged him even tighter, and he smiled. "I have dinner reserved for 4. I wasn't sure if you'd have plans, but I thought it would be easier to change them than to make them. Would you like to be my guests?" "Give us 20 minutes to get ready," Donna called, and they hurried up the stairs. "Do you want your gifts now or later?" he asked playfully. "Later is fine, but let's have some fun until they're ready," she replied, as she pulled him toward the couch. "First, put this new anklet on my left ankle. It means we're together." "What if I'm not with you?" "Then it goes on my right. Otherwise, it means I'm looking for someone." "That's new to me. Where did you hear that?" "Oh, everyone my age knows. I wouldn't have bought them if I knew all this was tied to a simple anklet." Kate and Donna wore theirs on the right, but their cute mini dresses made it hard to take it seriously. When Chris walked in with the 3 women, a lot of eyes turned their way. Even though the men were there with their partners, he stood out with 3 lovely guests. They looked elegant and calm while waiting to be seated, but once they were, they chatted like the young adults they were. Chris watched with a smile. They lived together, spent most days together, and worked out together, yet they always had so much to catch up on. He began to believe the saying that women talk a lot. Looking around, he noticed that his 3 guests really stood out. It puzzled him that Kate and Donna didn't have dates on Valentine's Day. Back at college, they would have had a long line of admirers. The answer soon came to him. They had decided to spend the evening with Joe since she wasn't seeing anyone and would miss him. Now that he was there, they were excited to join in. After a lovely dinner, they returned to the house. Chris suggested Joe open the bigger gift, and they shared some delicious chocolates. Encouraged by that, Joe opened the other box and revealed beautiful diamond earrings. "You're joking! Is this your first pair?" Kate exclaimed, quickly remembering Joe's modest past. Chris was sipping coffee and reading the news on his tablet when his sister joined him for a chat, followed by Kate and Joe. He was busy making breakfast with eggs, sausage, biscuits, and grits, while the women filled the room with conversation. Once they finished eating, they continued talking while he focused on his tablet, looking worried. Donna noticed and asked, "What's wrong?" "I'm really worried. Have you heard about the strange illness spreading from China? It's different from the flu." They nodded, so he went on. "The World Health Organization, WHO, and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, have been reassuring us. But I cannot help but worry. Today they are evacuating over 300 Americans from a cruise ship in Japan, and it seems that some of them might have what they now call COVID-19. Initially, the WHO stated that the virus was spreading slowly and might not be as harmful as initially thought. However, they are now suggesting that it could lead to more serious disruptions in society and the economy than major attacks. The CDC requested $4 billion to secure supplies to fight the virus, but their request was met with laughter from the Office of Management and Budget. It turns out that the supplies they need are hard to find because many of them are made in China, and China needs them for its own use. In simple terms, this situation is starting to look very chaotic, and no one seems to be taking effective action to stop it before it spreads too widely. "I'm not sure what they mean by upheaval," Donna said, looking confused. "I'm not sure either, sis. But I know that in Wuhan, where the outbreak began, the Chinese government locked down the city. By lockdown, I mean they restricted access to areas with infections. No one could come in or out, streets were empty, businesses were closed, and schools shut down. Hopefully that won't happen here. But if the virus is as contagious as they say, it could be a real possibility. The girls felt doubtful, but Chris's worry was convincing, and the thought of a lockdown was unsettling. They discussed how it would impact their classes, how they would get food, and where they could find safety. The more they talked, the more Chris switched into a preparedness mindset. Soon, they were all involved in making plans that they never expected to use, just in case. That afternoon, they went grocery shopping and filled 2 baskets with canned goods to store in the cellar, bought a basket of dry foods, and picked up vegetable seeds to plant in their garden. There were many what-if scenarios to think about, but they felt these items could be useful no matter what happened. On the way back, Chris stopped at Home Depot to buy a tiller big enough to enlarge the garden this year rather than wait until next year just in case. The gas-powered tiller cost over $1,200 and needed to be secured in the bed of the pickup truck he had rented for $25. They claimed it was fairly comfortable to use, meaning it wouldn't be too rough to operate and could easily manage the garden he was envisioning. It could also help with flower beds, preparing empty areas for grass or other gardening tasks. While they were marking off the garden area, Chris revealed his plans for spring break, a 4-bedroom house he had rented for a week starting Sunday, March 8th, and ending Saturday, March 13th. He mentioned that Diane and a friend were coming, and one of his college friends was driving down to join them. Louis was with a couple of friends, but they were not staying at the condo. This surprising news led to many questions, and soon they were focused on their trip to Port Aransas. None of them had been to the Texas Gulf Coast before, and they wanted to learn more about it. Chris turned on the tiller and started to break up the hard ground while the girls watched for a few minutes before going inside. After some time, Chris realized he needed a tip he had heard from an older man who saw them loading the tiller. "Son, take it from someone who knows about gardens. If you're working with tough soil, soak it with a sprinkler until it's wet at least 5 or 6 inches deep. Let it dry overnight, and you won't have a bumpy ride with the tiller the next day." He set up the sprinkler, turned it on, and went inside. To his surprise, the girls were researching the novel coronavirus and the new illness called COVID-19. The information they found was confusing and often had mixed messages, but they agreed it was serious. They then went back to planning their spring break on the Texas coast. They learned about Mustang Island, Port Aransas, and nearby Corpus Christi, and made plans for their beach trip, logistics, and what to wear. His flight to Denver was not until 4 p.m., so Chris began working on the garden early Sunday morning. He did not finish in time for church, so he sent the girls to Mass and asked them to bring back some fried chicken or barbecue for lunch. They returned with both, so he could take some Texas BBQ with him. He almost missed his plane, but he managed to get the ground ready for planting. They planted cold-tolerant vegetables like lettuce, spinach, onions, and potatoes. The girls agreed to water the plants like tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers that were kept in a warm part of the barn. They would plant beans, squash, okra, and corn when the temperature warmed up and the risk of a freeze passed. Happy with what he had accomplished at home, Joe hurried him off to the airport for his flight to Denver. During their nightly video chat, Chris couldn't help but recall their time together. She teasingly asked, "What do you mean?" "Oh, it's all clear in my mind. You sent the girls to the movies, and as soon as they left, you called me to come over. I remember looking up at the stairs and seeing you. When you winked, waved me over, and called me up, I could hardly move because I was so excited." "Well, dear," she replied cheerfully, "I had to share you all day Saturday, and I wanted us to have some us time. I didn't want to waste a moment, so I dressed up just for you. I don't know about red high heels, but you must wear white stockings with your wedding dress. I know you get to make most of the choices, but that's one of my wishes." She laughed happily and then asked, "What about tossing the garter?" "That's easy. I'll buy a nice lace one to put over your stockings, and that's the one I'll throw to the lucky guy." She grinned playfully, lifted her blanket slightly, and revealed she was wearing black stockings with lace tops. Lifting one leg, she teased, "Do you like these too, or just the white ones?" He could only respond with a happy sigh. Then she turned onto her knees, looked back at him, and asked, "Or do you prefer this view?" Hearing his excited response, she reached under her pillow, pulled out a toy, and set it up. It created a scene of rising excitement. "Oh, sweetheart, I miss you so much," she exclaimed. All he could hear in reply was soft sounds until they both felt the joy of connection. As the news about COVID-19 grew worse, the next week, Chris invited all three of them to join his evening video call with Joe. He suggested that they should only be around people they trusted were well, hadn't traveled, and weren't showing any signs of illness. He also advised staying away from crowds like parties until they understood more about the situation. All three agreed to those ideas, especially since they were studying for midterms in March. So far, they hadn't heard of anyone being sick, which meant Chris's plans to visit and drive them to the coast in the Jeep were still on. When he asked who else would be joining them, both Kate and Sis replied, "Not sure." Later, Kate mentioned that a group of boys they met would be around for the week, and they might spend some time together. The state of Colorado assured Carlos and Trey that construction would remain an essential job if any restrictions were put in place. They would just need to take measures to keep everyone safe. They had a meeting where Chris talked about what was known and believed about the new coronavirus. He suggested they follow the steps he had shared with the others and avoid busy bars and restaurants. There was some complaining, but nobody wanted to get sick or pass it on to anyone else. Carlos told everyone that if they felt like they were coming down with a cold or the flu, they should not come to work. Instead, they needed to call and inform him. For the tough construction workers, this seemed a bit excessive. They often worked even when they were sick or hurt, as it was a point of pride for them. They made their feelings clear to the bosses. Chris reminded them that this could be serious for them, their co-workers, and their loved ones, so staying home when they felt unwell was important. Some workers were still hesitant, but most started to agree. Chris hoped he was guiding them in the right way. The guidance from national leaders, including health departments, was unclear and often changed. Even the messages were mixed. Some were warning about a possible national outbreak, or even a worldwide pandemic. An official from the CDC warned that it could disrupt daily life significantly. Meanwhile, Speaker Pelosi was encouraging people to visit Chinatown in San Francisco, saying that they had the situation under control there. The president claimed only a few people were sick and thought it would disappear, like the flu when warmer weather came, so there was no need to worry. Chris hoped the president was correct, but he trusted the scientists studying the disease. Becoming an engineer requires a lot of science courses, so he believed the work of the medical scientists researching this virus was more reliable than the opinions of politicians. What was sadly lacking were easy tests for COVID-19, clear advice on how to stay safe, and essential supplies for hospitals that were seeing more and more sick patients. The CDC's decision not to allow outside testing slowed things down, and it was reported that without a central plan, hospitals and government organizations were competing to buy masks and equipment, which were already in limited supply. The construction site in Boulder was being handed over to the steel workers on March 6th for the building of the 12-story structure, which would take a few months to complete. Only Carlos and a small group of his current workers were needed in Boulder. The rest were assigned to other jobs, including the TCU Stadium, until they were needed again. The CU interns would stay at the site working under Carlos's guidance, and Chris would come back after spring break. Chris and the others were done for the day by noon on Friday, March 6th. Chris had planned a vacation for the following week to align with CU's spring break. The others enjoyed a long weekend before heading to their new jobs scattered across Texas. Beck was covering their travel costs, paying for flight tickets or giving mileage to those driving home. Chris took a flight home, leaving his pickup at the apartment. They were taking the Jeep Wrangler Sahara to the coast, and his friends met him at the airport, excited to see him again and thrilled about the trip. They went straight to his favorite steakhouse for an early dinner, and then stopped by Academy Sports and Outdoors so Chris could buy some new shorts and shirts for the beach. This time, the roommates didn't fall for Joe's attempt to persuade them to go out for the evening, so the four of them enjoyed the warm backyard, worked in the garden, grilled burgers, and had dinner at the picnic table on their new stone patio before nightfall. Another feature of the patio, built by Berto and his team of stonemasons the previous weekend, was a fire pit. Chris made a small fire, and they roasted marshmallows for dessert. It was getting cool despite the fire, but it was a calm, beautiful moonlit night with the sounds of night birds, so they put on hoodies and kept their conversation going. Just after 8:30, Jo got a phone call. She looked at her phone, showed it to Kate, and sarcastically asked, "What happened now? If they messed up our submission?" She answered the call with, "What's going on now, Andrew?" His response was loud and lengthy. Jo's frustration grew as she listened. "No, we told you we're not helping out again. I'll email our parts to Dr. Anderson and let him know you and Larry are submitting separately." Jo kept listening while Kate quietly explained, "Dr. Anderson put us in a psych work group with them, and we have a project due today. Andrew was supposed to be the team leader, but he and Larry don't do anything. We sent him our parts this morning, and he was supposed to submit it by 5. It sounds like they didn't finish their part again, and Jo warned them about the consequences if they messed up this time. Then send me all 4 parts, I'll fix it and submit." More listening before Jo interrupted. "You two are unbelievable, and don't think I can't hear the noise. Where are you?" "Exactly what I thought. Instead of finishing your parts and submitting everything, you started partying and messed up the merge, expecting us to come to help again." "Stop talking. You're just making it worse. We'll be there in 20 minutes. We need a quiet place, your laptop, and some privacy. If you cause any trouble, I'll call Dr. Anderson right away. Understood?" Jo hung up, turned to explain, but Kate interrupted. "I already told you and we heard you. Blaming it on the merge, huh? Well, the good news is that it should only take a few minutes for 2 focused women, not like 2 people who are not thinking clearly." Chris and Donna offered to help out, but they reassured Jo that they could manage and would be back in about 45 minutes to an hour. "Where is the laptop?" Donna asked. "In Andrew's room in the SIG house," Jo replied. "Call us if you need anything," Chris said as they headed to the Jeep. "We will," they both promised. Once they were gone, Donna moved to the chair beside Chris and in a playful voice said, "Bubby, can you please make me another marshmallow?" Chris laughed. "I remember that little rascal. But aren't you supposed to be sitting on my lap while you ask for those? Or on Dad's lap when you're asking him?" She got up and settled onto his lap, putting on her cutest pout, and said, "Please, Bubby, marshmallow." He hugged her tightly, laughed, and then roasted 2 marshmallows. "Do you want to hold them yourself, baby sister?" "No, Bubby, you're much better at it, and I'm cold, so I'm going to cuddle with you while you cook." She wiggled a bit so he could reach the fire, wrapped her arms around him, and rested her head on his shoulder. "You were such a handful back then, and you still are. But I still love having you as my favorite little sister," he teased. "I always felt safe and happy when you held me like this," she said in her normal voice, "and I still do. Sometimes I get jealous when Jo sits in your lap that used to be my spot." "It was, and it still is if you need a hug. You know I love you too. Now our marshmallows are ready, let's eat." Donna pulled both marshmallows off the skewer and handed one to Chris, then cuddled up to him again. After she finished, she offered her fingers to be cleaned, then playfully wiped some off Chris's. "Yummy! Now let's cuddle more," she said in her cheerful voice, moving closer just like when she was 4 and he was 12. Chris began to feel a little uncomfortable holding her. She was definitely not 4 anymore, and their parents weren't across the fire smiling at them. But Donna was already relaxed. She fell asleep quietly within 5 minutes. Chris held her, watching the fire and listening to 2 owls hooting to each other. He felt really happy here with his girls. They had become a family in a way. He sat still and calm, thinking about the future. His phone rang. It was Jo's ringtone, their special song. When it played, he quickly picked it up from the table nearby and answered. "I'm switching to FaceTime," Jo said loudly. "I want you to see what's happening. You might need to come help us, but maybe they'll behave if they know you're watching. These guys won't leave us alone in the room where we're trying to work." The phone showed Jo's face, and he could see some young men moving around behind her. He could also hear Kate fussing at someone in the background. A big guy moved behind Jo, put his hands on her shoulders and said, "Feels good, doesn't it? How about you come upstairs with me?" Jo raised her hand with her engagement ring and said, "I already told you I'm engaged. Now take your hands off me before things get ugly." The man continued, ignoring her. "That ring doesn't change what I want. I know you want to have some fun, so let's go to my room." As he reached out, Joe yelled, "Get your hands off me or you'll regret it. Chris is on FaceTime with me right now and he'll help if I need it." "Your friend is far away. He can't save you tonight," the man said, getting closer. "Use your training," Chris shouted through the phone right after Joe screamed. He repeated it when he heard Kate yell, "No, leave me alone!" There was a moment of quiet, and he shouted the same thing again. Donna quickly got off his lap and called for a ride. Chris yelled for the girls to take action and added that they'd be safe when he arrived. Meanwhile, Donna had called 911 and urgently reported that girls were in trouble at the SIG house on campus. Then the man made a mistake. He let Joe go and grabbed her phone to yell at Chris. "I'll take care of your girl before you get here." He continued staring at the phone before suddenly screaming in pain. The phone fell onto a surface facing upward, so Chris could only see the ceiling. He heard at least 2 men shouting in pain and movement around the phone. Someone yelled, "You're going to regret this," followed by more cries. Amid the chaos, Joe said, "You think you can scare me? Come on, if you're strong enough to take me on, go ahead. You don't need to be rude." "What? Are you scared of 2 girls?" He heard more shouting and then more cries. "Hey, where are you trying to run off to?" It was too late to escape now. The flashing lights meant the police had arrived, and Joe had everything on video. Joe's voice faded away as Chris shouted, "Joe, Kate, are you okay?" Kate's face appeared on the screen. "Chris?" "Yes, Kate. Are you guys all right?" "I am. Joe is chasing them down the stairs. She's really angry. They must be glad the police are here to keep her from getting to them." "What about you?" Chris asked. Kate spoke quickly, making it hard to understand, but he caught some of it. "Larry's finger is broken, and I hope he gets what he deserves. After I dealt with Larry, I went after Jack's friend Otto, who wouldn't stop bothering me, but he ran away when Joe took Jack down with a kick to his knee. Jack was on the floor yelling, so Joe faced Andrew, who started shouting at her. She shouted back, and when he tried to hit her, she dodged, jumped, and kicked him in the face. The rideshare dropped them off at the frat house, where several police cars and an ambulance were parked with their lights on. A crowd of people was gathered, chatting and taking photos. Chris noticed 4 boys in handcuffs on the ground, 1 in the ambulance, and 2 agitated girls waving their arms around while still in cuffs. The police warned people to stay behind the yellow tape, but they saw one of the female officers checking something on her phone while Kate talked to her. The officer called over a man in a suit. He looked at the phone for a while, nodded, and spoke to her and the girls. Soon the handcuffs were taken off, and they were released. They piled into the Jeep and drove home. Still buzzing from the night's events, they excitedly shared stories about the boys' poor actions after finishing their project and sending it to their teacher, along with an explanation of what had happened. Then they acted out their reactions to the bad behaviors, saying things like, "He was standing like this, so I did this." They even watched the video Kate had recorded when things started getting out of hand. Donna, caught up in the excitement, added, "I should have gone too. If I had been there, I would have." Chris chimed in, "So, are you all happy you spent money and time on those self-defense classes?" They agreed that it had been worth it and promised to keep going. Chris playfully looked at Kate before turning to Joe. "And you, little fighter, once you started, you didn't want to stop, did you? Chasing those boys through the house must have been wild." He couldn't tell if the excitement had worn off or if she was just tired, but her response was quieter than he expected. "That wasn't the smartest thing I've ever done, was it?" There were at least 30 more men in the big party room downstairs, and I knew I wouldn't have stood a chance there. I don't know what happened to me. Once I started moving, it felt like I was making up for all the ways I had been treated badly. I was pushing back against all the bullying and threats from Elwood, his sons, and their friends. I think I learned something about myself. My teacher says I like martial arts because I have a lot of anger inside, and exercising helps me let it out. I'm not sure about that, but I felt something snap inside when Jack touched me in a way I didn't like. It made me want to fight back against everyone who had been mean to me or to Kate, or who had said something hurtful while we were trying to get our work done. "Maybe we should think about having kids, honey," Chris joked lightly. "With my temper and your strength." "Speaking of kids," she whispered, changing the topic quickly, "maybe we should go upstairs and practice." They left Kate and Donna talking excitedly while watching Kate's video for the 4th time. On Saturday, they slept in, and then all 4 went outside to work on the garden and with the plants in the barn. Chris planned to mow, but the girls wanted to turn over the flower beds to get ready for planting. They made a plan. Chris would till the soil while Joe mowed, Donna would spread fertilizer after Joe finished, and Kate would pull weeds in the garden and use a trimmer around the flower beds. None of them had done those jobs before, but they felt happy to be trying something new and helping out a common project. They finished before 3 p.m., giving them enough time to pack for a week at the coast. Chris gave them a rundown of what to bring: swimsuits, shorts, 2 pairs of jeans with tops, and a couple of sundresses in case they went out. Still, he knew what to expect. So he wasn't surprised when early Sunday morning each of them brought out a large suitcase, a backpack, a makeup bag, and a bag for hanging clothes to the Jeep. They were a bit surprised, though, to see a covered trailer attached to the Jeep Wrangler Sahara Edition. It was already half full with coolers, a beach tent, folding chairs, lounge chairs, and fishing gear. But their bags fit easily, and there were hooks to hang their clothing bags. The weather was cool in Fort Worth, with daytime highs in the 60s and lows in the 50s, but the forecast for Port A was 7,563 today, with highs in the 80s for the next 4 days. They were all wearing shorts and tank tops, excited about the warm beach, but they also had on light jackets because it was cool in the morning. None of them had traveled on Interstate 35 before, but they had heard stories about heavy traffic, fast cars, and construction that seemed to go on forever. Still, it was the best road to take until they reached Waco, where they could switch to smaller, nicer highways. Just north of Waco, they stopped to buy some tasty Texas pastries known as kolaches and clobas necks. These treats were filled with fruit or sausage and were perfect with large cups of coffee. As they left Waco and drove on US 77, they enjoyed the view of Texas ranches and farms. They passed through towns like Cameron, Milano, Lexington, Giddings, and LaGrange, and stopped in Schulenburg to stretch their legs and grab some soda. There was also locally made jerky for sale, so they tried beef, pork, and turkey jerky for snacks. They continued through more farmland until they reached Victoria, entering the coastal plains region. They caught their first glimpse of the water as they drove toward Aransaw Pass along Copano Bay. Huge wind turbines towered in the sky, looking even bigger as they got closer, standing out amid the fields of cotton and grain. In Aransaw Pass, they crossed the causeway to the Intercoastal Canal and waited for the ferry that would take them to Mustang Island and Port Aransaw. Their car was the first in the middle row of 5. Like everyone else, they got out to enjoy watching the fish swim and the dolphins play near the ferry. Their condo was on the southern edge of town, just behind some barrier dunes separating it from the Gulf of Mexico. They were happy to find a wooden walkway built over the dunes, allowing easy access to the beach. Since it was a private condo, Chris told the security guard at the gate who he was and showed him the key. The guard checked his list, informed them that the gate opener was on the kitchen counter, and let the gate open for them. The condominium was just what you would expect from an owner with means. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, each with a balcony and bathroom. The ground floor featured a large living area with big windows, couches, and 3 comfy chairs. The open kitchen and dining space occupied one side of the house, and there were 2 small bathrooms located between the living and dining areas. There was a big storage closet under the stairs. A large balcony wrapped around the front of the house on the ground floor, with a covered hot tub for 10 people at one corner. The community pool and a sand volleyball court were just a short walk away, and the path to the beach started there. Behind the condo was covered parking. 2 of the 4 parking spaces were filled with bright beach buggies. They carried their bags inside and chose their rooms, leaving one for Diane and her guest. Donna texted her sister to find out they were just leaving, so they would arrive in about an hour. Donna asked her to call when they were close, and then they planned to head to the beach. Chris was busy preparing one of the buggies with a sunshade, 4 lounge chairs, and a cooler filled with drinks. He quickly went upstairs to change into swim shorts and met the excited girls outside. They wore light cover-ups since it was only in the low 70s at 1 p.m., but the sky was clear, the sun felt warm, and a gentle breeze blew. It looked like a perfect day for the beach. Donna drove one buggy with Joe and Kate, while Chris took the one loaded with supplies. They drove out of the gate and headed north to reach the road to the beach, then made their way back down the beach toward the condo. They worked together to set up the blue and white striped sunshade, and Chris unloaded the cooler while the girls arranged the lounge chairs. Suddenly, Chris noticed the girls take off their cover-ups, excitedly putting sunscreen on each other. He was surprised by how lively they looked, but quickly called out for help with his sunscreen. They rushed back and soon had him covered in lotion. Then Kate shouted, "Last one in is a rotten egg!" And they dashed toward the water. Chris hesitated. Though the air was warm at 73 degrees, he knew the water felt just as cool. He picked up 3 large beach towels and walked toward them. The girls dashed into the water, tumbling in as they played. They squealed when they went under and quickly scrambled back to shore, shivering and holding their arms around themselves, clearly feeling the chill. Chris stood a few feet away, holding out the towels. "Want to dry off already?" he asked gently. "I thought you wanted to swim." They each grabbed a towel and began rubbing their skin, trying to warm up while giggling and chattering their teeth. Donna finally shouted, "My God, that's cold!" Chris knew he might get in trouble, but he couldn't help but smile as he watched. After a few seconds, Kate spotted him and yelled, her teeth chattering, "You knew and didn't warn us!" Joe glanced at Chris, seeing the innocent look on his face as he held up his hands in defense, and realized he was guilty. "Throw him in!" she cried, trying to catch him, but he quickly backed away, dodging their attempts to corner him. After a few minutes of playful chasing, Chris ran a few steps down the beach and suggested, "Toss your wet towels on the loungers, and let's jog to warm up. I can tell by your shivering the water was a bit chilly." They tossed their towels, but then made another attempt to catch him. Unfortunately for them, Chris was faster and led them on a playful chase down the beach, all of them laughing and calling out threats as they ran. After running for about a mile, Chris slowed down, turned, and jogged backward until they caught up, still laughing and trying to catch him for letting them jump into the cold water without warning. After another stretch, he suddenly darted into the water, diving headfirst into a wave. He emerged, standing on a sandbar, and called out, "Come on in! The water's great!" Just as they were about to yell back, a little boy standing nearby said, "That man is crazy! The water is freezing!" Donna laughed and replied, "You're right, he is crazy." She waved discreetly in Chris's direction before turning back to the group. Chris splashed around for a bit before swimming back toward them. "Why aren't you all swimming?" he asked, grinning. "Isn't this what the beach is for?" They all gave him disapproving looks, and once the boy wandered off, they playfully signaled their frustration. Chris, undeterred, ran out of the water toward them, arms wide, announcing, "Looks like I'll have to catch you and toss you in." The group scattered in different directions, shrieking as they ran for the cabana. Kate, being closest to the water, was the first one Chris caught. She kicked and struggled playfully as he carried her back toward the water. Laughing, she tried to wriggle free before he could toss her in. They continued their playful antics, the group sharing a light-hearted moment full of laughter as the day at the beach carried on. "What would your fiancé say?" Kate teased. He started to look around, but she reassured him, "Relax, they're all back at camp. You can look, touch, or kiss, whatever you want." She playfully pressed closer to him. Chris smiled but shook his head. "You're a real temptation, Kate, but I'm not that kind of guy." "I know," she said with a grin. "That's why I can tease you so easily." With that, she adjusted her top, and he helped her down into the shallow water by the shore. "It's not as cold now," she said softly. "Maybe it's because you're warming me up." Chris glanced over his shoulder and saw Joe and Donna looking for sunscreen. With a playful tap, he lightly patted Kate on the back. "Behave!" he chuckled. She winked back at him and teased, "I'll give you 10 minutes to make me stop." They both laughed and started heading back to camp. It was a playful moment, but it added to the playful dance they had earlier. Kate had made it clear she was interested, but Chris kept his cool, knowing where he stood. Later, they applied sunscreen more carefully and relaxed on the loungers to soak up some sun. Chris declined their offer to join, saying he was waiting for a call from Diane, his fiancée. Almost as soon as he mentioned it, his phone rang, and it was her. He grabbed the beach buggy, informed the guard, and waited for her arrival. Moments later, his phone rang again. This time it was his college buddy, Wayne, checking on their location. Chris described the camp and hung out until Diane and her friend arrived. Diane's car pulled up and Chris waved, opened the gate, and led them to the condo. After a warm hug, Diane introduced, "This is my boyfriend, Dale. He plays second base for the Commodores." Dale was tall, athletic, and looked every bit the part of a ball player. Chris showed them to their room, gave them the front door code, and then took them down to the beach. Wayne and his group of friends arrived around the same time. They exchanged cheerful greetings, and Wayne reassured Chris, "Don't worry, none of us have any symptoms. We've been cooped up in the car for 2 days, so we're all good." Chris laughed and welcomed them. Diane then caught everyone's attention by removing her cover-up, revealing a swimsuit that was more revealing than the others. She confidently asked Dale to help her apply sunscreen, clearly enjoying the attention. Dale obliged, and although he tried to stay focused, it was obvious he was a little flustered by her presence. The other guys noticed too, except Chris, who quickly looked away and made his way over to his fiancée, offering to help her with some more sunscreen. And with that, the group settled into a day of fun and relaxation at the beach. Her skin was shining with the oily lotion, but she said she was fine, so he started with her feet and worked his way up. Wayne and his friends, Bill and Todd, were enjoying some beer and chatting with Donna, Kate, Diane, and Dale. They were all around Chris's age, single, and down in Texas for spring break before heading back to their jobs in St. Louis. They joked about being too old for this, but wanted to have one last fun time together. Their other friend, Barry, was staring at the 4 girls while sipping a big drink from a large cup. When Chris first met Barry, he felt uneasy. Barry was tall and heavy-set, about 6 of 1 inch and 225 pounds, with a noticeable belly to match his big chest and arms. He was going through a divorce and boasted about it, claiming he had many spring breaks ahead of him and was eager to meet new people after being tied down for 2 years. Chris was careful when putting sunscreen on his fiancée. He didn't want to give Barry anything to think about. Barry's gaze was so obvious that it made Joe frown back at him, but it didn't seem to make a difference. After an hour, the girls decided to move their loungers into the shade because the sun was leaving white marks on their skin. Wayne offered everyone a beer from his cooler, but the girls, along with Dale, chose water instead. Chris accepted a beer and Wayne went to grab it from his Tahoe. Barry offered his drink to Joe and said, "I bet these lovely ladies would like a mixed drink. I have bourbon or vodka with Coke or Sprite. What do you say?" All the girls turned him down, with Diane saying they needed water to stay hydrated. He laughed. "You ladies don't get it if you're not drinking. You're not having enough fun." Joe scrunched her nose and replied, "Donna, Kate, and I are still teens, so we can't drink anyway, but I hope you don't think we need drinks to have fun." Kate broke the tension by playing the Beach Boys on her MP3 player. "Surf City! Let's dance!" she shouted, and began moving in the sand. The other 3 girls, Dale and Chris, joined her, and Donna encouraged the guys to join in as well. Everyone except Barry joined in. He drank and watched them dance, adjusting himself in his shorts. He seemed far too proud of himself, which was a bit off-putting. They danced to more Beach Boys songs, paused to drink more water, and then danced again. At 5, Chris excused himself to start a fire for their hamburgers. He asked the other men to help get the cabana ready for the night before they all gathered at the condo at 6. He walked to the boardwalk and headed to the condo. At 5:45, 2 beach buggies and an SUV arrived, and the girls went inside to prepare vegetables for the burgers. The men joined Chris by the grill, and it quickly became clear that Barry had been drinking too much. The more he drank, the louder and more annoying he became. The girls set up the picnic table on the balcony, placing the vegetables and sauces in the middle before joining the men. Soon, all 4 men were frowning at Barry, and Dale looked like he might get angry if Barry put his arm around Diane again. Donna and Kate moved to the other side of Wayne to stay away from him. After Barry hugged Joe and complimented her, she stayed close to Chris. Chris shot a glance at Wayne, and they stepped over to the hot tub. "Your friend needs to calm down. The 4 girls here are important to me. My 2 sisters, my fiancée, and her roommate, whom I need to look out for. Get him under control, or we need to ask him to leave. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I will if I have to." Wayne sighed and called Todd over. "Barry's crossed the line. Can you talk to him, or do we need to go?" "Looks like he can't help himself," Todd said quietly. "He messed up his marriage with a wonderful woman because of someone else at work. I thought bringing him here would help, but maybe not. Let me see what I can do, and I'm sorry, Chris." After taking a shot, Todd managed to keep Barry in check during the burger cookout. However, Barry continued to drink and got worse as the night went on. Chris glanced at Wayne, who nodded, and they decided to leave. As they got in the car, Barry boasted about his plans for the night. The rest of the group had a great time, and getting rid of Barry made the evening even better. 2 hours of happy chatting and stargazing later, they started to feel tired, said goodnight, and went to bed. As for the weather, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday were mostly the same. Warm in the mid-80s with low winds and plenty of sun. Each day began with coffee on the balcony, enjoying the warmth of the rising sun, followed by breakfast and a walk to the beach. After setting up their area, they looked for shells and driftwood, then returned to relax in the shade. They enjoyed sandwiches for lunch, talked, and took another stroll along the shore. The beaches further north near the pier were busy, with many flags waving above tents and RVs as they walked that way. By early afternoon, groups of college students could be seen driving up and down the beach. Every day when the boys saw the girls, they would pull up close to the camp in a couple of cars, and the excitement would start. Chris and Dale acted like camp leaders, even asking the boys if they had any colds or fevers before letting them come near. They got some strange looks, but Dale didn't want to miss baseball games or let Diane get sick, and Chris wanted to keep his 3 campers safe from illness. No one was quite sure how deadly COVID-19 was around the world, but the World Health Organization said it was about 4%. The American president thought differently, mentioning 22 deaths from 544 cases in the U.S., and he kept saying it would disappear soon with warmer weather. It didn't seem too dangerous at the moment, but it was very easy to spread and could cause many more infections than the usual annual flu deaths. Despite the clear lack of worry from most young people they met, Dale, Chris, and their friends stayed careful about meeting new people. That night, they went to a restaurant called Virginia's on the Bay, choosing to eat in the quieter upstairs area at an outdoor table, and they decided not to visit another place afterward since it was too crowded. Chris thought about how worrying about crowds might not even matter if the virus was highly contagious, but no one really knew what to do. So he used his common sense and knowledge to try to stay safe. Tuesday was a lot like the previous days. Sunny, a day at the beach, relaxing, and enjoying meals in the shade. In the afternoon, they went shopping. Encouraged by Diane and some other girls they had talked to, the 3 19-year-olds bought colorful bikinis, shorts, and tops. Dale and Chris exchanged looks, realizing they would attract even more attention on the beach wearing those outfits. On Wednesday around 11, Wayne, his friends, and 3 young women arrived at the camp. It seemed everyone, except for Bar the Great, had found someone since they last saw each other on Sunday, and Bar had a swollen eye. He looked even grumpier than usual and was sipping from a large mixed drink. As always, there were many college students at the party tent they had set up nearby, moving back and forth between the striped cabana and the party tent, which was filled with loud music. Most of the group were Aggies, but they didn't fit every stereotype, even though they were proudly flying 3 maroon and white Texas A-Day and flags. Dale brought a gold and black Vanderbilt flag, and Kate had a purple and white TCU flag, so they happily tied them high on the cabana posts with twine. Chris didn't bring an orange and white UT flag because he thought people might mistake it for another team's. Instead, he parked his orange Jeep Wrangler Sahara where everyone could see the University of Tennessee stickers. The group was talking about going out dancing that night, but Chris wasn't keen on the idea. They all knew each other well enough, but he didn't want to mingle with too many new people. He wandered back to the condo complex to talk with the manager and then headed back. When he returned, he noticed Jo and her roommates were in the other tent with some other girls and a group of boys. They were dancing to the Beach Boys, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. It looked like good, innocent fun, just college kids having a great time while respecting one another. He walked over to join them. When the music paused, he raised his voice and made a suggestion. "I know many of us want to go dancing tonight, but I'm a bit worried about the new virus. So I found an alternative. The manager has offered us the social hall here for a dance, but we have to finish by midnight and leave it clean. I was just there, and it's a nice space with good sound and speakers. Maybe we can get some playlists together for different types of music. What do you think? It's better than going to a crowded bar that might be unsafe, right?" There was a buzz of excited chatter for about 10 minutes, mostly from the girls, until one of them spoke up. "We like the idea, but we want to dress up a little. Not too fancy, but not beach clothes either. We'll wear sundresses or rompers. Are you guys willing to dress nicely and wear dancing shoes?" The guys agreed, but this sparked a lively discussion as they shared their outfit ideas. Once they decided on their clothes, Chris gave parking instructions, since the social hall had its own parking area outside the gates, which wasn't easy to find. The women wanted to decorate the hall, but Chris reminded them to keep it tidy before they left at midnight. As they were getting ready to change, one of the boys called out loudly, "Wow! Maybe this virus is serious. They just canceled the Houston rodeo." This news caused a stir. The rodeo, known as the biggest in the world, brought a lot of money to the city each year, so canceling it wasn't a small decision. Someone else added, "I didn't say anything before because I thought it wasn't important, but the health organization just called coronavirus a worldwide pandemic." Everyone left feeling more thoughtful. When they returned to the condo, Chris learned that all classes at his university would be online for the rest of the semester. Soon after, Joe, Donna, and Diane checked their emails and found out that their school had extended spring break until March 20th, after which classes would also be online. Diane and Dale checked but didn't find any notices. At the dance, about 2/3 of the invited guests showed up. Those who were there enjoyed the music and dancing, except for one person. Barry, who was getting drunker and more forward since leaving the beach, seemed to focus on Joe. As one of the hosts, Chris was kept busy from 8 to 9 getting things started. When he went looking for Joe, one of the guys told him she had gone outside with Barry. This worried him not because he thought Joe was interested in Barry, but because he knew Barry could be unpredictable. Chris stepped outside to look for them. He didn't see them in any cars, but he heard voices from the side of the building. He peeked around the corner and saw Joe and Barry sitting in chairs, leaning toward each other. Joe had both of Barry's hands in hers. It looked a bit concerning, but what he overheard cleared things up. Joe was speaking softly, telling Barry he needed to call his wife first thing in the morning to apologize for everything and ask to meet in person. Barry was quietly shaking his head and seemed upset. "She's not going to give me another chance. I hurt her too much, and I lied to her when I got caught. I knew she would leave, so I told her I didn't care and that I could find someone younger if I wanted to. That really hurt her. She won't get over it easily, and she wants the kids, the house, half of everything, plus child support. I'll be broke." "Barry, the courts will give her those things anyway. She's not asking for anything more. I'm sure she's angry with you, but that divorce paper is just her way to protect herself. But if you're not ready to call her and try to fix things, then you can keep drinking, continue acting like a jerk, and face the consequences. You might lose your job and face some trouble, but hey, it's party time." Barry's crying grew louder until Joe stepped in. "Todd says your wife is amazing and you both love each other. You're 32, have 2 kids, and clearly care about them. Aren't you mature enough to admit your mistakes and ask for forgiveness? Even if she doesn't take you back, don't you want to stay connected with your kids? I just don't get what you're thinking." Barry cried silently for a couple of minutes before he started to calm down. He looked up and said, "You are really wise for someone so young. I guess I haven't figured things out yet, but I'm going to change that. I'm done with drinking. Tomorrow I'll have coffee and call her as soon as she wakes up. She might tell me to leave and I would understand, but at least I'll hear her voice." "Barry, you won her over before. Don't forget how to be charming. Lately you've just seemed rude, but I know you can be likable if you take care of yourself and get a more mature haircut. Will you call me after you talk to her? If I don't hear from you by 8:30, I'll bring Chris and Dale over just to keep you on your toes." Barry laughed. "Honestly, I'm more scared of you. I'll call you by 8 unless she keeps me talking longer." Chris came back inside. Joe seemed natural in her role. She was going to make a great counselor. Joe and Chris danced through the rest of the evening, no matter the music. She didn't mention Barry, who had vanished. Donna and Kate had 4 young men trying to get their attention, and Diane and Dale were always together. They said their goodbyes at midnight, locked up, and walked back to the condo. They were enjoying spring break, but worries about the spreading virus were growing. They talked about whether to stay or go home, but decided to wait until morning to make that choice. Joe and Chris stayed up for another hour talking about their future, and then shared a gentle moment together. This calmness felt different yet satisfying after the excitement of previous nights. Everyone woke up early, sipping coffee indoors while watching the morning news. The situation was serious, and they were trying to understand the spread of the virus, the guidance from health officials, and what might come next. Joe's phone rang at 8:20. She stepped out of the room before answering. After about 10 minutes, she returned with a pleased smile. When Donna asked who she was talking to, Joe simply said, "A friend." Everyone looked at Chris, who shrugged and turned back to the TV. "So he made the call?" he asked her quietly when she sat back down next to him. "How?" She started, but he smiled and said, "I can read your thoughts better, keep them nice." "You're joking you were listening in. Did you not trust me?" she asked, looking upset. "I trust you, just not Barry. By the way, you did a fantastic job with him. You're really good at this." She smiled, kissed him on the cheek, and replied, "I can manage people like Barry, especially when I see their struggles, but I know you want to look out for me, so I forgive you." After receiving more concerning news about the spreading virus and quick emails from their universities, they decided to enjoy the beach for one last day and head home early. Vanderbilt had sent a note to Diane and Dale, who was more worried about baseball being canceled than his classes shifting online. This news made them talk more about where to be while the virus situation continued. Maybe they'd get lucky and summer would put an end to it, but the WHO did not believe it would happen, making it tough to plan anything. Donna, Diane, and Kate were seriously thinking about going home until things improved, and Dale, who was from a small town near Vanderbilt, felt the same way. Chris and Joe walked down the beach together, discussing their choices. With construction in Boulder still happening, he felt he should be there. He didn't want to be away from Joe, who didn't want to be away from him either, so they decided to close up the house and move to Colorado for now. They would both rather wait it out at home, but responsibilities were calling. They tried to have a regular day, but everything felt quieter. The Aggies coming to pack up their tent in the afternoon marked the end of their spring break fun. Still, they had lunch, soaked up the sun. They were already nicely tanned and wanted to keep it that way, and braved the water around 3. It felt warmer, or maybe they were just used to it because it wasn't too bad. They tried body surfing, built sand castles, and then took down the cabana, cleaned it off, and packed it in big bags. Chris and Dale drove the beach buggies back, loaded down with their camp gear, and put it in the trailer. When the girls looked back at their camp from the walkway, there were no signs left of the fun they had in their little piece of spring break paradise. It made them sad. Diane and Dale decided to follow them to Fort Worth so Donna could pick up what she needed, or at least as much as they could carry. They, along with Kate, would stay the night and leave the next day. Kate was taking what she could on the plane her dad was sending to get her, knowing she had most of what she needed at home, except for her laptop and school supplies. On the way back, Chris called Roberto to ask him to keep an eye on the house and offered him the unplanted flowers and the fruit from the ones already growing in the garden. He and his wife offered to help finish planting the garden in a few weeks in exchange for some of the harvest. He agreed quickly. They planned to visit the next day so he could show them how to check the automatic watering system for the garden and the sprinklers for the yard, and they also needed to get an electronic gate opener. They decided to drive their Jeep and pull a trailer to Boulder so they could take what they needed if things got worse and travel became harder. The group from Nashville was leaving early, and Kate's flight was expected around mid-morning. Joe and Chris had more tasks to complete, so they intended to watch the sunrise on their drive west Sunday morning. They shared a heartfelt Friday night, and Saturday morning was even more emotional before they decided to part ways. Dale and the Alexander girls were heading east to Tennessee at 7:30, and Kate's ride arrived at 9:30. After more hugs and promises, Joe was left alone with Chris. There was a lot to do, but she had a playful grin and a particular spot she wanted to explore first, the porch on the 3rd floor. In an unusual moment, she wanted to kneel on the soft chair on the porch. When he chuckled and asked what inspired this idea, she shared that she wished to be close to him in that position each time they were at the beach. As she knelt and glanced over her shoulder, he could not resist her playful spirit. Her joy grew as they shared this moment. Before long, she expressed her affection for him with delight. Berto and Lupe arrived in the afternoon, just as promised. Chris showed them how to set the watering timers, turn them off when they weren't needed, and then took them on a tour of the gardens, flower beds, and property. They were impressed with everything, but were even more amazed by the house. Berto hadn't seen it since the renovations were completed, and he praised Jo for her choices in furnishings and decorations. "Are you sure you want to leave this place for months? Why not have Trey send someone else to Colorado and keep you on projects here?" he asked. Jo and Chris exchanged looks. They hadn't thought of that. Chris had a job in Boulder that allowed him to work while also studying for his master's in architectural engineering at CU, which meant he would need to head back to Colorado. Or would he? The job in Boulder was meant to help him support the company while he continued his education. Now that school was online, did working for the company still mean Boulder? If he did a similar job in Fort Worth, would the CU professor in charge of his internship, which everyone knew meant continuing a job he had already been doing well, accept his work at a new place as equal? This was something to think about. Chris asked Lupe and Berto to go out to eat with them, but they said no because they were worried about getting sick. He apologized and suggested ordering takeout together, but they declined again, saying their oldest daughter was making dinner. They thanked him for the offers and promised to take him up on it another time. After they left, Chris and Jo went to their favorite chairs on the back porch to think about their future. They were just starting to grasp how much the coronavirus was affecting their lives and that it was just the beginning. They realized that choices made today might need to be changed in the coming weeks or months. They wanted to break free from the limits the old normal had set on them. The old ways wouldn't work in these strange and possibly new times. They stayed up late, going inside and starting a fire when the mid-March wind grew too cold. They had a brainstorming session where they agreed that there's no such thing as a bad idea or question. Nothing was finalized because no decisions were made. Over coffee with biscuits baking and bacon and eggs ready to cook, Chris shared his thoughts with Jo. She moved from her chair to sit on his lap, kissed his cheek, and said, "I came to the same conclusions through my feelings. I think we should go with this and see what happens." They made it to the Trinity Episcopal service at 11, and then Chris checked his messages to see if he heard back from Trey. "Come on over, lunch is on us. We need to talk." On the way to the Becks, Jo, in a serious tone, told Chris, "During the silent prayer, I went over our plan in my mind and asked for guidance, and I felt warmth spread through me. I think it means he supports our plan." Chris replied seriously, "I'm not sure we're making the right choice either, but I believe that if things go well, it will show that we're on the right path. If not, we might face difficulties. One thing is certain, we will learn more about it soon." Sandy and Trey Beck welcomed them, and they enjoyed a roast beef lunch, followed by apple pie with Bluebell ice cream for dessert. They moved to the study. Trey looked at Chris and asked, "So, what's on your mind?" Chris explained his thoughts clearly and then waited. Trey kept a neutral expression and thought for a long moment after Chris finished, finally asking, "When are you going to talk to Dean Speck and Dr. Laurie? If they won't accept a job in Fort Worth for credit, I don't really have a choice, do I? I emailed them to ask for a video call tomorrow morning at 8:30. I haven't heard back yet, but I think the important part of that conversation will be my ability to explain what I will be doing. If I were them, I would prefer to compare two jobs to see if they are fair, instead of comparing a possible job to one that already exists. Okay, let me speak to Bob and Sam first. I have an idea, but I want to hear what they think before I proceed. I'll call you tonight before 9. They left with an extra apple pie Sandy had on hand, sharing a wink with a slight nod toward her husband. Jo told her fiancé that was a good sign, though he didn't quite understand what she meant. The four-way conference call started at 8:35. Chris explained his plan again, answered questions, and shared what he thought he could offer to a project and to the home office in Fort Worth while finishing his classwork. "Is the project you want to work on the stadium?" Bob asked playfully. "Sir, I will gladly work on any job you give me," Chris replied. "That isn't the question I asked, is it? Would you like to answer my question?" "Yes, sir, it is," Chris said, "because I was involved in its early stages and would like to be there as it takes shape. I believe my experience in management, logistics, and purchasing will be useful no matter where I'm assigned." The phones were filled with laughter, and then Trey Beck said with authority, Tell your dean and professor that you will be the on-site project manager for the stadium project and for other tasks as needed. You will also train in procurement and scheduling management. We'll start with 3 days as project manager and 2 days for training, but that may change as new needs arise. They can reach out to me, Bob, or Sam for details. Let them know these new roles represent a step up based on hard work and will meet the expectations we originally discussed. That evening, Chris was full of energy. Poor Joe had to handle all his enthusiasm, but she was happy to do it. They had become such a close couple that they could easily read each other's feelings, so this excitement brought a joyful dynamic between them. They were glad to have an extra hour the next morning before making the call to Rocky Mountain time. This gave them time for extra coffee to help Chris wake up. The dean was okay with the proposal, saying it allowed Chris to use what he was learning in graduate school. Dr. Laurie was still trying to understand online courses and felt uncertain about overseeing an internship happening 800 miles away. After getting reassurance from his top student and support from his dean, he decided to give Trey, Bob, and Sam a chance to share their thoughts during a Microsoft Teams video call, which was set for 1 p.m. RMT. Chris wasn't in the video call, but Trey had him on speakerphone so he could hear Dr. Laurie's worries and text his thoughts if needed. It wasn't necessary. Trey explained the new job tailored for Chris. Bob clearly outlined his responsibilities at the worksite, while Sam described his main office duties as a trainee. Since this new role was much higher than Chris's current position as an assistant project manager in Boulder, and Trey added an exciting offer for a plane ride to observe Chris at work, Dr. Laurie agreed. It was done. Once the video call ended, Chris thanked his 3 bosses warmly. Trey laughed and said, "Remember this when we push you hard, young man? This isn't an easy job. It's going to challenge your mind and energy to manage both roles, keep up with your classes, tend to that large estate you are fixing up, and support your lively fiancé, who we know is listening in. Hi, Joe." "Hi, Trey, Sam, Bob. Thanks for including me, but I'll be here to help Chris balance everything. You can't imagine how happy we are with your choice. No matter how big the place is, I can't think of any better place to be during this pandemic, and you made it happen. I already cared about you all, but I care even more now." The busy executive spoke about how this was good for everyone, complimenting Joe and acknowledging how helpful she would be. Joe may be young and come from a humble background, but she understood the impact her charm had on others. Chris wrapped up the call with another heartfelt thank you, and they celebrated together. "We should do something nice for Roberto and Lupe, maybe cook for them and their kids or get them something special. Without his guidance, we might still be cramped in that small apartment in Boulder, worrying about our home, garden, and flower beds, while you would be stuck there all day while I worked. Berto may not have my degrees, but he's got a lot of common sense. Call him as soon as he is off work," Joe suggested. "We owe him so much. Let's start with a simple thank you and see how we can show our appreciation. In the meantime, you and I should head upstairs for our own little celebration. Later we can fill in your family and Kate. I know they're going to be so happy for us." Clothes were scattered as they hurried up the stairs to the 3rd floor, where they celebrated joyfully. Roberto chuckled, teasing Chris about missing the big picture. He and Lupe were eager for some fresh tomatoes and vegetables from the garden, but they decided on hamburgers and hot dogs for dinner once things calmed down. He ended the call with excitement about working with Chris again and mentioned he'd see him the next day. Joe and Diane had set up Zoom accounts for school, so they called the Alexanders. The Alexanders were delighted with the new plans. They had a nice chat until Mom brought up a different topic. "Did you know many churches are going online and gatherings over 50 people are being limited? I hope things get better when the weather warms up. But if it doesn't, what will we do about your wedding?" Chris replied, confused. "But I don't remember picking a date, Mom." She looked surprised and then shy. "We were hoping for a wedding in July. Trey plans to give you some time off after classes, so we thought, Mom, are you trying to take control of my life again? Joe and I should choose the date first before any plans." She looked a bit embarrassed, but then she quickly recovered. "Son, it usually takes a while to plan a wedding. We're already a bit behind, but we've done some initial planning. And those plans might not work now, right? This situation isn't going away just because the weather changes. It has been spreading in the warmer parts of the world, just like here." As Berto said, it's time to think differently. Old plans won't work during a pandemic, and it's getting worse. Also, Diane, Dale, Donna, Kate, and my bosses with their families aren't close to 50 people. You planners might want to think about making a smaller guest list with just close family and friends. We may have to consider getting married in our backyard now, and then have a big reception in Nashville when it's safe and everyone is vaccinated. Right now, we have to decide if we want something like that or wait until this pandemic is over, which could take years. I haven't talked to Joe about it yet, but since we are studying from home, we could get married now and have a honeymoon whenever it's possible, with you holding a reception later. Joe, Diane, Donna, and Dan all smiled, watching Deborah, who looked quite worried about the idea of a small wedding. Before she could respond, Dan chimed in. He's right, Deborah. These times call for sacrifices, and we have to rethink what we want and what we can do within the limits of the current situation. We're already making adjustments in our business, the way we eat, grocery shop, and live every day. Schools and colleges are closed. Churches are being asked not to gather, and only essential businesses are allowed to open. I doubt you'll be able to get approval for a 400-person wedding right now. Deborah sighed deeply, looked directly into the camera, and said, "Can you give me a little time to process this? Maybe Joe and I can talk over the phone in the next few days and help me figure things out. She deserves an amazing wedding, and so does my only son." They still had a couple of things to sort out: Chris's apartment in Boulder and his truck, which was parked there. After talking it over, they decided to fly out early Friday, end the month-to-month apartment lease, say their goodbyes, and drive back home in his truck on Sunday. Their friends, who used to live next door, had moved to a small house in the foothills at the start of the semester, and Chris hadn't seen them since. So the only goodbyes were for his co-workers, which he managed before leaving work on Friday. The campus and streets were almost empty, and most shops were closed, including the gym Chris used to go to. Boulder wasn't quite a ghost town, but by Friday evening, it felt like one. On Saturday, they booked a time to visit Rocky Mountain National Park. They knew some of the mountain roads would be closed in March, but the lack of people compared to their last trip was surprising. The lowlands covered in forest were beautiful, and when they saw a herd of elk and moose wandering through a meadow with a stream running through it, they stopped to watch. It was cold, but not too uncomfortable, so they decided to go for a short hike along a trail that started a few miles down the road from where they saw the elk. The path followed a stream and ended at a peaceful lake surrounded by trees. They found a flat rock, sat down to share a snack of trail mix and jerky, and marveled at the quiet. They whispered to each other, not wanting to disturb the serenity of the moment. The two of them were completely alone, surrounded by nature's beauty. Joe sat down beside him, leaning back into his arms as he gently held her, resting his head against her hair. They stayed like that for a while, enjoying the peacefulness and each other's company, quietly appreciating the stillness of the moment. He unzipped her quilted jacket and gently placed a hand under her flannel shirt. His hand was cold, contrasting with her warmth. She gasped slightly at the touch, and they leaned in, sharing a deep kiss, their closeness intensifying the moment. "Stand up," Chris said softly. Joe obeyed, rising from her seat. He helped her adjust her clothes, and they shared a quiet, intimate moment, standing together in the chilly air. He held her close, placing her gently against a boulder for support, their breath visible in the crisp mountain air. They embraced, the connection between them growing as they stood in the quiet of the wilderness. After a moment, they separated, both smiling at the warmth they shared in the cold environment. The natural beauty surrounding them seemed even more vivid. They took a moment to appreciate the stillness of the mountains before deciding to head back. Later that afternoon, they stopped at a small barbecue joint that offered outdoor seating. The food wasn't exactly like what they were used to from Texas or Tennessee, but it was good enough. The owners were friendly and made them feel at home. The experience added to the unusual but memorable nature of their first outing during the pandemic. Once back at the apartment, they spent time packing up and getting ready for the trip back. They enjoyed their evening together, spending some quiet, peaceful time before heading to bed at a reasonable hour. Their journey home began just after sunrise on Sunday. A light layer of snow had fallen overnight, but it wasn't enough to cause any trouble on the road. The fresh snow made the drive picturesque, and they enjoyed the serene beauty of the landscape as they made their way back. Chris got them to Trinidad just in time for a late breakfast, and then they drove through Raton Pass and on to the flatlands. They stopped at Capulan Mountain to stretch their legs, check out the visitor center, and take a short walk around the old volcano before continuing on the long drive through the dull landscape of eastern New Mexico and the western panhandle of Texas. Joe joked about wanting to do something adventurous in a volcano, but it wasn't really the right spot for that, especially since there weren't many people around and they were getting a lot of attention from the park rangers. Joe drove for 3 hours, and then they stopped to eat again in Amarillo. After that, Chris stepped on the gas a bit for the last 5 hours of the trip. They left at 7 a.m. and arrived at 7 p.m., and their old house looked more inviting than ever. During the long drive, they switched between country, folk music, and news on the radio, and the news was getting more alarming. Hospitals in some places were overcrowded, and doctors were worried about the increasing number of patients. The government seemed to struggle to provide the help that medical workers and citizens needed. Supplies of ventilators, masks, and other equipment were running low, and frontline workers were getting sick and having to stay away from their families. Businesses were shutting down, and cities were urging people to stay home. Families were stockpiling supplies, leading to shortages of toilet paper, milk, bottled water, and canned food. Chris heard about other issues from the news and decided to set up a meeting for Monday morning with his bosses to discuss possible work slowdowns due to supply problems. Everyone accepted right away, including his dad, who would join through a video call. Joe was so tired from the trip that she went to bed before 10, and they both slept soundly through the night, which was unusual for them. When officials had declared construction work essential, Trey, Chris's dad, and others in the field felt a sense of relief. However, the information Chris shared that morning brought back a lot of worries. Imports from China and other countries were slowing down, and steel was mostly imported. To make matters worse, workers like longshoremen, warehouse workers, and truck drivers were getting sick, leading to shortages and unexpected supply issues for important building materials, even while the supplies were sitting in ports. At first, everyone around the table and on the Zoom call wanted to stay positive, but Chris managed to persuade them to prepare for the worst as well. It was time to think about their choices. Would they need to consider layoffs or temporary leave? And what about the aftermath? Would workers on leave still get paid? Would their company health insurance stop if they weren't working? Taking away pay and health insurance from workers during a pandemic was very unfair. But how could they keep paying when the company had no money coming in? This was a sudden and unexpected event, and neither Beck nor Alexander Construction was ready for it. In just an hour, they shifted from doubt to urgent crisis planning. They prioritized projects, reviewed and changed contracts, and started looking for ways to keep workers employed or supported in different situations, including the worst case. No one left until 6, and they planned to meet again in 2 days to talk about new ideas and plans. On his way home, Chris called his dad and was happy to hear that the building materials had already been delivered and stored at the lakeside site. This meant they could offer jobs to laid-off workers at the lake, providing them with some income and speeding up the project. Chris also felt good about having filled the barn with cedar lumber for Joe's gazebo and the cover over the area for his outdoor kitchen, fire pits, and tables. He got lucky when a supplier of Alaskan yellow cedar reached out to him after their delivery to a project in Boulder fell through, and their truck driver was unable to work due to illness. The supplier offered the truckload for a very low price if Chris could pick it up and return the truck to Georgia. Chris knew a retired truck driver who lived nearby. He offered him a good payment and promised to clean the truck thoroughly before he picked it up. He even included a plane ticket from Atlanta to Denver. The driver laughed and agreed, but asked to take a rental car back instead of flying. His wife would join him, and they could visit their kids and grandkids along the way. They shook hands, and Chris called the supplier and sent the money. The materials were unloaded and stored in a clear spot on the east side of the barn. Chris was ready to do the building work, but he would need help pouring the slabs and putting up the wooden structures. Luckily, he was confident that skilled help would be available soon, either from Beck's crews or other construction companies. Joe had a delicious meatloaf with vegetables warming in the oven, so they enjoyed dinner while Chris talked about the day's meeting and the plans they'd made. After that, they began discussing their personal plans during the pandemic. The Amon G. Carter Stadium project was almost finished, and they had everything they needed to wrap it up by early summer. Other Beck projects were struggling as supply chain problems got worse, but they managed to keep everyone working part-time through April. The foundation was finished at both the house and the lake, and teams from Beck had laid the base for the lake house after the plumbers and electricians did their jobs. Chris, Roberto, and two others dug the foundation and framed the base at Chris's home. The newest member of Beck's electrical crew was a lively character who had just moved from South Texas. He agreed to wire both projects in exchange for beer and the chance to watch Chris's fiancée while she tended to her garden. He said this with a big smile, adding, "You might be the only one who knows for sure, but she seems like quite a catch." Pancho, as they called him, spoke English and Spanish with a distinct Texas twang. He quickly became a favorite among Chris and the other workers due to his cheerful attitude, great sense of humor, and his collection of amusing jokes he'd share freely. Back in Texas, he owned a small construction business, so he was also a licensed plumber and a skilled cabinet maker. When he learned that Chris needed a plumber, he jumped at the chance, asking for another case of beer and more time to chat with Joe. Joe was amused when Chris shared his payment with her, but after meeting Pancho, she understood and made sure he got plenty of time to enjoy their company. On the second day, she called a friend named Sally, told her all about Pancho, and invited her over to help keep him company. Sally arrived in comfortable clothes, similar to what Joe wore, but even more casual. At Chris's request, they showed up at the backyard after 5. They walked over to check out the work site and playfully teased Chris and Pancho, asking silly questions and chatting about their hard work. Chris sent the girls back to the house to grab some drinks and meet them on the deck, while he and Pancho cleaned up for the night. Pancho began to put his shirt back on, but Chris told him not to. "Do you have any shorts in your truck? If so, put them on and come meet me on the deck. If they want to tease us, let's give them a little fun back." Pancho found some shorts that were just as casual, and Chris helped him trim them a bit to fit better. The men approached with a relaxed air, but their attire, a bit too short for comfort, carried the risk of a wardrobe malfunction. The girls couldn't help but notice, their expressions a mix of surprise and amusement. Grabbing a beer, the men sat down across from the girls, casually spreading their legs as men often do, though not usually in such revealing cutoffs. Joe and Sally found themselves staring, and Chris caught their gaze, grinning. Instead of feeling embarrassed, the girls playfully responded by stretching and shifting in their seats, clearly matching the playful energy in the room. As Joe stretched, the bottom of her top lifted slightly, and Sally's shirt revealed a little more than intended. Though nothing was fully exposed, there was a sense of shared playfulness, with the guys clearly noticing too. "Dirty Sally," Joe teased with a laugh. "Chris thinks Pancho knows the best dirty jokes. I say you do. Show him what you've got." For the next few hours, the group exchanged jokes, laughter, and stories, each funnier than the last. The atmosphere was lively and full of energy, with drinks flowing and laughter filling the air. By the end of the evening, they were all happily tipsy, the night filled with light-hearted fun. Realizing it was late and her friends had had a bit too much to drink, Joe insisted Pancho and Sally stay over in the guest rooms down the hall. She then took Chris by the hand and led him to their room, suggesting they freshen up with a shower. They stepped into the bathroom, sharing a quiet moment as they helped each other wash off the day's adventures. The warm water and shared smiles made for a peaceful, intimate ending to the evening as they cleaned up and prepared to rest. Afterward, they settled into bed, enjoying each other's company and reflecting on the fun night they'd shared with their friends. The bond between them felt even stronger as they drifted off to sleep, relaxed and happy. The area was difficult to reach from behind, but Chris's careful touch found the right spot. Joe gasped, her body reacting to the sensation, and she felt overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. As the waves of pleasure coursed through her, her legs gave out, and she leaned heavily on him for support. Chris gently wrapped a towel around her and carried her to the bedroom, laying her carefully on the bed like a child. He dried her off with care and then took a moment to dry himself. Joe, feeling exhausted, lay there quietly, trying to catch her breath. She whispered, "I need a moment, just a minute to rest." But her body responded differently as Chris continued his gentle touch. Despite her protests, her body reacted naturally to the closeness, and she found herself lost in the moment once more. The connection between them grew deeper, and she couldn't hold back her emotions any longer. Joe wasn't sure why the emotions were so intense. Maybe it was the playful day they had or the closeness they shared in the shower, but the feeling swept over her in a way she hadn't expected. Her mind raced as the intensity built, and she gave in to the overwhelming sensations. It was as if time stopped, and everything else faded away, leaving only the two of them in that moment of deep connection. Chris looked at her with a smile, knowing that they had shared something special that night. He felt a sense of satisfaction, not from his own needs, but from seeing her so happy and fulfilled. As they lay there together, Chris reflected on Joe's growth. He knew she was becoming more confident, more aware of herself with each passing month. It was exciting to witness her becoming the woman she was meant to be: strong, thoughtful, and passionate. Chris chuckled softly, realizing that as Joe continued to grow, he would need to keep up. It was a challenge he welcomed, knowing that their journey together was only just beginning, and there was so much more to discover about each other along the way. She was really something. "Joe, I want you and Chris to know that my nickname, Dirty Sally, isn't because I rush into things. But after hearing the excitement from your bedroom last night, I'm not shy to say that I ended up in Frank's room and we had quite the time. I'm not ashamed to share that with you, Joe, because after witnessing what I heard last night, it was hard not to get caught up. I'm not sure if Chris has some magical charm or, as Frank said, you really do light up the room, but you are definitely the queen of excitement." Joe's cheeks turned a little pink, but she took a sip of her coffee and calmly asked, "So, how did things go with Pancho? I was busy at the time." Frank smiled and Sally began to speak, but Chris jumped in. "If you're the queen of excitement, then Sally is the princess in waiting, and that was just the beginning. I can't wait to hear more once Pancho gets to know her like I know you." Sally smiled at him, and then at Frank. "I don't know about that. He just got lucky because I was so fired up by Joe's excitement. It won't be that easy if I give him another chance." "Want to give me that chance now? I know you're feeling good after talking about it," Frank joked. Sally stood and teased him. "Do you think you can keep up? I'm always up for a good time." They hurried up the stairs holding hands and closed the bedroom door behind them. "Want to sit here, sip coffee and listen? Or would you rather spend time with your girlfriend? I think you could both use a little time together after last night." It was noon when they all returned to the kitchen, looking a bit more relaxed. Chris asked if bratwurst wraps and a salad would be okay. "Usually I'd cook something nice for guests, but between the noises from your room last night and my energetic girlfriend this morning, I just didn't have the energy." "I would usually help out, but it seems Sally was having her fun too," Pancho chuckled. Joe and Sally exchanged knowing smiles. As the evening wore on, relaxing on the deck after cleaning up from their hard work, Sally asked a question they needed to discuss. "So, when are you two getting married? I can't imagine any method of birth control would work if you two keep it up every day like you have since I arrived." Joe looked at Chris, who looked back at Sally and replied, "Saturday, July 18th, my fiancé, my sisters, my mom, and her friends have it all planned out. Well, they had it planned out until COVID changed things. Now we need to find a place where we can gather a few dozen friends without any issues." Joe looked at Chris with excitement. "Really? July 18th? You've finally chosen a date?" He nodded, raising his hands. "You asked me to pick a date. What's wrong with this one?" Joe squealed and jumped onto his lap. "That's a great date. I love it. Have you found a place too?" "That's the challenge. I'd like to do it at Trinity, but..." Pancho looked surprised. "Why anywhere else? Look around, this spot could be perfect for a celebration. It only needs you to get up a bit earlier to finish the work." "What else could you want? There's all this green space, a nice spot to gather, and friends who can sit in chairs. We could have some drinks and food for everyone." Sally added, "I can picture it now. Chris is waiting at the gathering spot with the officiant and his best man. Joe and her friends, including me, will walk down the path. I'll make sure Joe looks great as we reach the spot. It'll be evening with lights decorating the trees." "It'll be amazing," Joe turned to Chris. Why not? I really like this place, he replied. Sounds good to me. Are you telling everyone tonight or waiting until tomorrow? You know she'll say she needs more time, no matter the date. As they enjoyed drinks, Pancho and Chris made plans to get everything ready by late June or early July. Meanwhile, Joe and Sally chatted excitedly about all the little details that could make the celebration special. Chris had to remind her that this meant no relaxing in the hot tub until after the big day, but she laughed and said they could enjoy that after the honeymoon. That night, neither couple was disturbed by the other, as they were both filled with excitement. The next day, they worked hard, taking breaks only to watch the online services from Trinity Episcopal and to eat. With their big day now clearly in sight, they felt a sense of urgency to make decisions, schedule their time, and budget for the celebration. Chris and Pancho found another project almost finished, along with two others that needed workers for the home and the lake. He hadn't told Joe yet, but the idea of flying somewhere far away, dealing with possible quarantine, made spending a week at the new lake house sound much better. After the church service and the brunch that Sally and Joe made, Chris and Joe thought it would be a good time to call their mom. They were actually using the Alexanders' home phone, but they knew Deborah was on the other end. After saying hello, they asked all the family members to gather around the kitchen phone and put it on speaker. Chris started, "Mom, Dad, sisters, we have something to tell you. Joe, go ahead." With a happy smile that showed a bit of nervousness about what Mom might say, Joe shared, "We've set a date. We're getting married on Saturday, July 18th at 7 p.m. in our backyard. I know this isn't the big church wedding we talked about, but..." Before she could finish, loud cheers came from Mom and the sisters, along with a relieved, "Thank God," from Dad. Chris let them celebrate for a moment and then said, "Mom, this is the best we could come up with right now. No one knows how long the pandemic will last, and we don't want to wait. We're making improvements to our backyard to make it, as our friends say, better than a destination wedding." "While it isn't everything you dreamed of..." "Pause right there," Mom interrupted. "First, we're all so happy you found a way to do this. Second, I agree. With a bit of help from us, your lovely place could be a special events destination if you can finish everything on time. Third, we are overjoyed for you. We, your family, want to help. We'll do anything you and your future wife allow us to do." Joe joined back in, and the sisters began asking questions and discussing details. Chris stepped away and texted his father. "Got a moment away from Mom?" "Yep, now good," Chris called Dad. "Is there any chance we could get the lake house ready by the 19th? I think traveling might be hard by then." "So, you're thinking about having your honeymoon there? Lake Whitney isn't exactly an exotic spot, son. Won't she be let down?" "Dad, you need to remember who my bride is. If we can have our honeymoon there, I can buy a boat, skis, and fishing gear. My little country girl has never even been on a boat. I promise she will love swimming, boating, and fishing. You know how well she skis on snow. I bet she'll be up the first time and won't want to stop. If we could travel, we would go somewhere by the water. We'd swim, relax in the sun, fish, surf, or take a boat ride, and probably do some sightseeing. We can do all this at the lake and even visit places like Glen Rose for some fun activities. I will find a dance hall or two, but that shouldn't be too hard in the countryside. Knowing Joe, she will want to spend most of our time relaxing, so I'll get a better mattress than what we'd have in a hotel." His dad laughed and said, "I would say that's too much information. But after staying together for a few nights and hearing Donna's stories, I already know. Actually, that sounds like a great place for you two. It's quiet, not fancy at all, and Joe has no idea what that means, so let's go for it. Are you talking to Trey or am I? We need to get this started right away." They contacted Trey, shared the new plans, and he offered them a great deal. Have the materials ready, pay Beck for his work and transport, invite him and Sandy to the wedding, and he would make sure the house was ready by early July. After they ended the call with Trey, Dan said he would buy the ski boat, pontoon boat, and 4 personal watercraft if Chris would find the boats and jet skis they wanted and handle their delivery when the dock and boathouse were ready. Chris agreed to find the boats and send pictures or videos to Dan before buying them, asking what the budget was. "I don't know the budget and it doesn't matter," he replied. "I've been saving for 20 years, and I plan to use it more than anyone else after I retire there sooner than you think, so spend what you need to get the best." Sally joined the call. and since they were still busy talking, Chris changed back into his work clothes and went outside to the wedding site to meet Pancho. He updated Pancho and found out that he had been on the phone too. "I think I have the crews we need lined up over the next 6 weeks. It's all not set in stone yet, but everyone wants to make it happen for you, so I feel good about it. You might have to think of ways to bring people in for the wedding because everyone who knows you wants to come. So maybe we can ask the local officials to give us a break for a few hours. Now, help me climb into this ditch and get these pipes connected and secured. We've got a lot to do and not much time." They worked hard until dark and accomplished more than Chris expected. Frank was a quirky guy, but he was really smart when it came to construction. He made changes to Chris's plans that helped finish the job faster and made everything better. Chris admired Pancho ever since they started working together, but now he saw why the other workers respected him so much. As darkness fell, their beers arrived right on time. The girls had finished chatting for the moment, so they relaxed in their chairs, enjoying their first drink quietly. Sally caught a whiff of something nice and suggested they take a shower, so they got up and headed upstairs. 20 minutes later, they came back with fresh beers, and Chris asked, "What's cooking? The kitchen smells fantastic." "That would be my famous smothered steak with rice and broccoli. And if you behave tonight, Jo will make her famous chocolate chip cookies," Sally said, smiling brightly. "Wow, she's beautiful, fun, brings me drinks, knows a ton of jokes, and can cook. How about a double wedding?" Pancho said excitedly. "Hold on there. All I know about you is that you are decent company and willing to pitch in. Let's try dating a few times before we start planning," Sally replied. "Why wait? I already know you like me. You're attractive and you cook really well, so let's get moving," Frank joked back. Sally playfully climbed into his lap and said, "Let's see if you make it through tonight before you think about rings. I've been taking it easy on you." Dinner was as delicious as promised, and Pancho managed to make it downstairs the next morning feeling pretty good. Chris had made coffee, had biscuits baking, the sausage was sizzling, and a bowl of scrambled eggs was set to cook. When the sausage was done, he tossed the eggs in a skillet with melted butter and sent Pancho to wake the girls. He called up the stairs, "Breakfast is ready. Come on down. You can wear what you like." It took them a little while, and by the time they arrived, Chris was filling plates. He noticed the two girls came down wearing cozy robes and slippers, moving slowly. Once they settled at the table, he asked, "Looks like Pancho made it through your night, but you look a little tired this morning, Sally. What happened?" Pancho had a satisfied grin while he waited for her answer. Sally looked at the smiling boys, took a breath, sat up straight, and said, "I don't often admit I lost, but I will say he won that round. I'm going to the gym with Jo this week. I really need to work on my fitness and stamina." Chris laughed and high-fived Pancho. Pancho stood up, walked around the table, and gave Sally a kiss on the head. "You're the best I've ever had. No one else comes close, sugar. And I'm still ready to set a date." Sally leaned her head back and said, "You have to ask my dad and my 4 big brothers first. If you get through that, I might think about it." Jo was watching with a smile and called her fiancé over. He came to stand behind her. "We should make sure you both take it easy. You're too tough on us delicate flowers." Chris leaned down and gave her a playful kiss. "What happened to the confident girl who said I was too old to keep up?" "She's learned that you're old but wise about love," Jo said with a happy grin. The priest at Trinity Episcopal wanted to talk things over before he would agree to lead their unique gathering. He said he would do it, but only if Jo would join the choir when they could have one again. After all, he felt he would be breaking some rules, so he asked for something for the church in return, smiling as he spoke. Jo agreed right away, excited that she would be doing something she secretly wanted but felt unsure about. Then he added another request. "You need to sing How Great Thou Art after you join your husband in the gazebo, but before I lead the vows. You can practice online with our choir director if you like, but believe me, you amazed us when you sang it in church. You probably noticed that most of us stopped singing after the first verse to listen to you." This made her blush and feel a little nervous. She tried to back out, but Chris leaned down and kissed her cheek, saying, "Please, honey, this would make me so happy and proud, and it would make our wedding special. Your first performance as my beautiful and talented wife would be unforgettable." She was scared, but with 2 months to practice, it felt like a long time away, so she agreed. That choice would stay in her mind right until the moment the hymn started. The priest gave them a guide he created that included questions they hadn't thought about. When do you want to have the rehearsal? Who will walk the bride down the aisle? What wedding march do you want? Which songs should be played? How many people will be in the wedding party? Is there enough space on the gazebo? Will you write your own vows or use traditional ones? If they are traditional, which ones? Are they having a rehearsal dinner? Should he plan to stay? Should he stay for the reception? Lead prayers over meals? As they drove home, Chris admitted, "Mom might have been right. There are a lot of details." Joe had been quiet until now. "Chris, what about my mom? I know she can't come because she's in prison, but is there any way to include her? She's trying so hard and I don't want her to feel left out." "I think we should include her too. Let's see what we can do. Do you want me to speak with our attorney, or would you like to handle it?" "Let me do it," she answered. "I'll need to tell her about the wedding at some point, and if she can't be involved, I'll have to break that news." Tuesday was a big day. Crews arrived at the house at 7:30 to speed up the work, and 2 vans delivered teams to the lake house to start that project. The necessary tools had been sent to the lake on Monday, so by 8:30 a.m. they were hard at work. Chris wanted to discuss their honeymoon with Joe and thought it would be nice to take her to the lake to show her what they had planned and share his ideas in that setting. Lake Whitney was not one of the places they had mentioned before, like the Bahamas, Costa Rica, or Hawaii, but by midsummer, they might not be able to travel anywhere. COVID was already causing problems, and things seemed to be getting harder. Each day, Chris started at his house, organizing the crews, then moved to Amon G. Carter Stadium to help with the finishing touches. Like all construction projects, there were small issues needing his attention before they could finish everything properly. He worked from 9 to 4 at the stadium on Mondays and Fridays, but went to the lake project at noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays, often getting home after 6. Wednesday mornings were spent in the office as a management trainee, and he visited whichever site needed him most in the afternoons. When he got home, Joe had dinner ready. They ate, cleaned up the kitchen, and then worked out in a corner of the barn for an hour before showering. Joe had finished her schoolwork during the day, but Chris still had his to complete, so he often stayed up until 10, working on the computer on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights. At the work sites, masking and social distancing seemed to be helping, but workers still caught the virus in other places, which affected their projects. The bigger issue was the supply chain problems. Even when items arrived at ports and warehouses, transportation problems often left them stuck. Over the years, many factories in the U.S. had moved to other countries where labor was cheaper. The reason given was that being active was good for everyone, because Americans should not be stuck in low-paying jobs. Instead, they should seek more education and training in technology or other growing fields. This idea was being challenged as the delicate state of the global economy became clear. The American healthcare system faced issues as well. Medical workers showed great bravery and care, but the system that relied on supplies from other countries struggled. Thankfully, many American companies quickly shifted to provide essential supplies, but the news was filled with stories of crowded hospitals with tired workers lacking necessary resources. There was a lot of blame and accusations of problems in the government at both federal and state levels. Local governments tried to handle rising public health needs while facing pushback against masking, social distancing, and restrictions on gatherings. On May 18th, the mayor of Fort Worth updated the emergency declaration from March 19th. This new declaration limited gatherings of more than 50 people at one place, with some exceptions, and restricted larger venues like event centers and places of worship to half their capacity. It also allowed for quarantines and controlled movement in and out of the city. Chris had not seen any efforts to limit movement to and from Fort Worth on his trips to Lake Whitney. He doubted those measures would work since many people commuted from everywhere. He understood the 50% occupancy rule to mean that as long as he had enough chairs in his backyard and spaced them 6 feet apart for families, they would follow the rules. They might need to use vans to bring people, as too many cars could attract attention, but Beck had enough vans if Trey agreed to let them use them. According to the order, they could consider moving the wedding into a church if they kept under the 50% limit, but he and Joe had already decided on the backyard. He wondered if another update would ban gatherings in churches altogether, as had happened in some cities. As the situation grew more serious, the government made more extreme decisions, so they decided to stick to their plans as they moved through mid-May and toward Memorial Day. Jo had finished her classes, but Chris still had a summer semester before he could earn his master's degree. He was feeling worn out trying to manage everything, and his supervising professor announced he would come to see him at the stadium project. When Chris said he would stay for 2 days, he decided to keep to his usual routine at the house, the stadium, and the lake house. He realized he couldn't spend 2 whole days at the stadium. If he wanted to see his friend in action, he could easily join them. He called Dr. Lorry and told him not to book a room or a car since he would be staying with him. Dr. Lorry mentioned that Dean Speck would also be coming, and Chris thought that was great. He quickly informed Jo about the plans. Jo started to worry about how the house looked. It was clean but not perfect, and she was concerned about not having enough groceries for their guests. Chris laughed and suggested she hire someone to help clean and buy any groceries she could find at the store. He didn't have the time to help, so that job was up to her. They arrived on Monday afternoon. Jo picked them up and took them to the stadium, where she introduced them to Chris and Bob. Jo received her usual friendly comments from the workers and waved back at them as she always did. She greeted Chris with a quick kiss in her light dress, and Bob teasingly commented about how Jo often disrupted things when she walked in. It was a routine day at the stadium, with workers gathered in the North End zone to discuss and review the next day's tasks. Dean Speck enjoyed the friendly atmosphere, while Dr. Lorry seemed a bit distant. On the way home, Dean rode with Jo, and Dr. Lorry rode with Chris. Dean asked Jo about their upcoming wedding and chatted with her. Meanwhile, Dr. Lorry asked Chris many questions about the internships, which felt unnecessary since Chris was actually managing the projects rather than interning. However, Dr. Lorry changed his attitude when they arrived at the house. He saw before pictures of what it used to look like and was impressed by how Chris transformed it into a beautiful home. He was even more pleased when he saw the nearly finished improvements in the backyard and learned about their purposes. Jo served a delicious meatloaf with vegetables and fresh fruit, and they enjoyed a tour of the house. She explained the improvements made and how they preserved the original features of the home, along with the ideas that led to these updates. By the time they returned from the 3rd floor to the living area, Dr. Lorry was laughing and chatting just as happily as Dean. Chris said his goodbyes and went to his office to finish some work. Jo continued to entertain their guests for another hour before directing them to their rooms. They heard Chris go to his bedroom around 10, just before they settled down to sleep after a long day of traveling. Jo had breakfast ready at 6:30, and the teams arrived at 7. Chris showed the guests around and spoke with Pancho. Then he discussed the day's tasks with the workers. Everyone dove into their jobs, and it was clear they enjoyed working together. Their friendly teasing and happy attitudes created a lively atmosphere. At 9, they returned to the stadium where work was already in full swing. Chris went over the plans for today and tomorrow with Bob. Bob then spent the next few hours checking the quality of the work on site, accompanied by the dean and professor. Everything was running smoothly, just as Chris expected. As usual, the workers occasionally stopped Bob to share ideas on how to improve their work. Chris listened to their suggestions, gladly approved the ones that made sense, made notes for future projects, and made sure to recognize those who came up with the ideas, both verbally and in writing. The dean laughed when Lorry asked Chris about the feedback. Dean Speck had read Chris's application and heard plenty about him from others, including the owner. Dr. Lorry, I really admire We Deming. I believe it's important for those doing the work to constantly think of ways to improve efficiency and quality. I know from experience that there are often better methods than the usual way. Mr. Beck gives cash rewards and better pay to those who find these improvements, but honestly, while money is nice, seeing your idea used is just as rewarding for many of us. At 12:30, Chris told his assistant he would see them tomorrow, gathered his things, and said to Speck and Lorry, "Let's go. We have another project to check out. I'm picking up Jo. She has our lunch packed, and we'll eat out there." "Is this part of your usual weekly routine, Chris?" Lorry asked as they got closer to the site, which was nearly an hour away. "Yes, sir." This is a lake house Beck is building for my father. It's part of my job, along with the work at the house and stadium. We're on a tight schedule. It has to be ready by July 19th. Joe, could you please show them some pictures from our last visit here in the winter? I think they'll be amazed by how much progress has been made in a few months. I will, Chris. But you need to explain why July 19th is such an important date, Joe said with a raised eyebrow, clearly curious. Well, honey, he replied, keeping his eyes on the road. With travel being hard and possibly not allowed by mid-July, Dad and I thought a new house by a lovely lake could be a great place for a honeymoon. What do you think? Her bright smile showed her excitement. When were you going to tell the bride, Toby, about this? When the house was far enough along to make it feel real. She's the only other family member who knows about it, and we need her help to finish and furnish it. That will be soon, so today seemed like a good time to show her. Besides, the bride Toby didn't ask the groom Tobe about many wedding plans, so he kept a little surprise for her too. Joe quickly looked through her photos, handed her phone to the dean, and moved closer to her fiancé. If you weren't driving, I'd tease you for being so sneaky. I've been so worried about what to pack for our honeymoon. Don't worry, the less you bring, the better, he said with a smile. They heard laughter from the back seat, and the usually serious Dr. Lorry said, You two make me want to fly home to Mona tonight. Joe snuggled under his arm, draped it over her shoulder, and whispered, So we get a new place to enjoy? A 5-bedroom house, a dock, a boathouse, 2 boats, and lots of lawn space. You're going to be busy, he whispered back. Oh, that's so much better than a simple hut somewhere. I love it, she said happily. More laughs came from the back seat. We can hear your whispering, you know. They reached the site just after 2 and parked near the vans. The piers for the dock and boathouse were poured at the same time as the house's foundation, carport, sidewalks, and outdoor kitchen. The walls were framed, and roofs were up on the house, carport, outdoor kitchen, and boathouse. The dock was finished and ready for boats. Sheets of insulation were stacked, waiting for the electricians and plumbers to finish their work soon. Pallets of stone for the outside of the house and patio were ready for the crew on Thursday. Wood paneling was stored in the living and dining area, and drywall was piled in the other rooms. It looked far from done, but Chris knew it would go fast from here. They needed Joe to fill in for Deborah in choosing colors for the inside walls, and to pick furniture, lighting, and kitchen appliances. She felt a bit hesitant, not wanting to take over for Deborah out of respect. Deborah was really happy with the work she had done on the house, so... Dean Speck and Dr. Lorry arrived unexpectedly. They had no clue where they were going, what they would see, or what their intern was going to do. He just handed them over to Trey Beck and Sam Schneider, who were waiting at the location. After Dr. Lorry was introduced and Sam finished warmly greeting Dean, Trey called Joe over. Hi there. I heard you're our interior design consultant. I want you to know that Sandy is happy to help you if you want. I told her I think you can handle anything, but she insists on letting you know she'll be here to assist, since she knows Deborah really well. Joe gave him a quick hug and said that Sandy knew her even better. She'd love to have her help, especially since finishing Deborah's house felt a bit overwhelming. Joe then hugged Sam and returned to her fiancé. As always, work had stopped when Joe, a charismatic young woman, got out of the truck. She smiled at the workers and waved, telling them she hoped it was okay for her to explore while they worked. Pancho laughed loudly and replied for the crew, Of course! You won't find many construction sites where you're not welcome, and this is definitely one of them. But you'll need this hard hat. He handed her the hat, and she kissed him on the cheek before looking at the bright pink safety hat. Oh, it matches my outfit, she said cheerfully, highlighting her white t-shirt, pink shorts, and white sandals. She placed the hat on her head, letting her wavy golden hair spill out. With that look, she caught the attention of the workers, who smiled and exchanged glances. She took Chris's hand, looked up at him, and asked, So where do we start? He smiled back and led her to the back of the house, where the electrical and plumbing work was finished. They walked through a framed doorway, and he began to show her the bathrooms and bedrooms along the hallway. Trey and Pancho were giving Sam and the 2 men from Colorado a tour of the site, stopping to explain each part of the construction and how it all fit together. Joe moved from room to room, trying to picture how everything would look when it was done. paying special attention to where the light came from. By the time they reached the kitchen, the plumbers were wrapping up, and the electricians were moving in with their tools. Everyone took a moment to appreciate the lovely sight before diving back into their work. They had to finish by noon the next day, and there was still a lot to do. Chris knew that being distracted by the beauty of the scene instead of staying focused could lead to a mistake, perhaps even an injury if one wasn't careful. He went to the on-site locker, pulled out cards with various paint samples, and joined Joe outside. Together, they stood by the house as Joe carefully selected the ones she wanted to consider. Around 3:15, Trey stopped by to inform them that he and Sam were taking the guests back to the office. They planned to review Chris's trainee duties and make sure the guests were fed before bringing them back for the night. At 4 o'clock, Pancho gave a sharp whistle. The workers all paused, packed up their tools, and secured their equipment, signaling the end of the workday. As they loaded up the van, Pancho approached Joe and jokingly said they had the place to themselves for the evening, warning them to behave. Joe rolled her eyes playfully and said, "As if." Chris chuckled and gave a playful promise. Once the vans disappeared over the hill, Joe excitedly began shedding her clothes. "Hurry up," she called to Chris. "Don't you know your girlfriend wants to try something fun down at the dock?" Laughing, Chris replied, "We'll have plenty of time to explore every room during our honeymoon, but for now, let's head to the dock." He quickly grabbed 2 lounge pads from the truck and brought them to the dock. Joe laughed in delight. "You're always prepared, just like a true Boy Scout." Chris smiled, knowing the special setting would add to the magic of the day. The dock wasn't exactly a construction site, but it was newly built and peaceful, and he knew Joe loved being outdoors. The two shared a close moment, enjoying the quiet and beauty around them. They spent time talking and laughing, appreciating the calm evening together. Wrapped up in the joy of the day, they let themselves relax in the unique setting, feeling connected to both nature and each other. As the evening continued, they enjoyed their time together at the dock, the stillness of the setting making the moment all the more special. At Chris's request, Joe moved in ways that felt natural to her body reacting as waves of intense sensations built up. Her muscles tensed, and the overwhelming sensations coursing through her body were too much, causing her to briefly lose consciousness. When she awoke, she felt Chris moving beside her gently, his touch steady and calm. His hands held her with care, and his movements were slow and rhythmic. Joe, now fully awake, responded by adjusting her body to match his rhythm, wanting to be present in the moment with him. "Please," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "I can't take any more. I feel like I'm going to explode. Just hold me close." In response, Chris pulled her closer, the connection between them deepening. He held her gently, allowing them to share the quiet intimacy of the moment. Together, they found a calm, peaceful place, the intensity of their earlier experience now giving way to warmth and closeness. As they rested, both exhausted yet content, Joe relaxed fully into his arms. They had shared something powerful, something that left them both feeling connected in a deeper way. That day, they only managed to enjoy the dock, as neither had the energy for anything more. But the connection they had made was far more valuable than any further adventure. The next day, the Dean and Doc flew back around noon, leaving the couple to reflect on their special time together. They didn't have much to offer him for his improvement, just a lot of questions about how he managed himself and his team. This led them to talk about Deming and the TQM processes, and then to simple respect and appreciation. Speck wanted to know how he found the problems in the original stadium design, but all he could say was that seeing the plans before the stadium and discussing his ideas with Coach Patterson made him uneasy. So he carefully looked over and thought about the existing plans again. Everyone recognized the benefits of his new designs, so they decided to go with them. Before they boarded the plane, Dean Speck told him he hoped Chris had learned as much from the university classes as they and the Boulder interns had learned from him about the reality of a work site. Meanwhile, after 2 days of struggling to be Deborah, Joe met with Sandy. They went over the plans and paint samples together, but felt unsure. "Let me call Deborah. We can say we're helping a friend with painting and decorating a house and would like her thoughts. That way we can keep Dan's secret but still let her have a say." Joe agreed, and they made the call. They had a nice chat for about 10 minutes, but when they explained their situation, Deborah laughed. "Is the lake house really ready? I thought it would take months." "Oh no, it's supposed to be a surprise. Tell us we didn't spoil anything," Sandy said hopefully. "You didn't think Dan could keep something that big from me, did you?" she asked with a giggle. As soon as he started hesitating about our plans for a retirement cabin in the Great Smokies, I knew something was up, so I started looking into it. I found the offer for the land at Lake Whitney first and then the payment later. When I heard about the lumber delivery to the lake, I was sure. I've let him keep his little secret so far, but now I feel the need to visit my best friend and help my favorite daughter-in-law with the wedding. Should that trip be this week or next? They all laughed, and Sandy and Joe released huge sighs of relief before Joe replied, "We should have known. I think next week will work. They're just finishing the interior walls now." "Great. I'll see you girls on Sunday." Chris, I talked to your mom, and she's coming down Sunday to help me with the wedding planning," Joe told him that night. He looked at her suspiciously and asked, "Did she figure it out on her own, or did she get it from you and Sandy? I told Dad the chances of keeping it a secret this long were tiny." Joe replied defensively. "She said he stopped talking about building a cabin in the Great Smoky Mountains, so she started looking into it. We didn't tell her she found out. The good news is that we now know what she wants, so I can stop worrying and focus on my marriage to the most handsome guy around." "Joe," he said, looking puzzled, "some of my friends told me there are 2 words that end everything. I do. That won't be you, will it?" She laughed at his joke and then at the question. "Yes, you'll have to charm me every night after we're married, so you need to work on that before we tie the knot." On second thought, I doubt that will stop after July 18th. "Maybe we should wait until the honeymoon to build up our energy," he replied. She looked at him playfully, dropped to her knees, and playfully said, "I might let you have a week off after the wedding, but this week you're on duty since I'll be off next week." Her mom flew in on Sunday, but insisted on taking a cab to their place to help get ready for the wedding. She had seen the plans before, but seeing the large cedar gazebo with a wide path wrapping around the house made her emotional. She gazed at Chris's outdoor kitchen with picnic tables and benches, but was curious about the large slab next to it. "What's this for?" she asked. Joe replied, "That's for our first dance, the dance with the groom's mom and other special dances before we celebrate." They hugged, and Deborah said, "I love you so much. I'm so happy you and Chris found each other." Sandy came over for breakfast on Monday, and they headed to the lake with Chris. He had taken the day off from the stadium project, which was almost done. They were working on the final details. As they drove further, Deborah looked more doubtful, but when they cleared the last hill, her doubt turned to joy. "Oh my gosh, what a beautiful place. It's stunning here." Holding her hand over her heart while standing beside the house, she exclaimed, "It's so big, just like my husband. He wants to make sure there's room for his children and grandchildren to visit. Oh, Chris, this feels like a dream come true." Chris didn't mention that the spacious house was quite different from the original plans, largely due to his commitment to quality. Just before the work began, he had overheard several workers speaking in Spanish to their crew leader. Curious, Chris listened for a bit, then joined them. He asked what was going on, and Esteban explained that they thought he could add a patio and a large room under the house by moving the foundation a little further south along the hill. He really liked the idea, so the conversation went on until he understood their plan well. He was so excited that he redrew the house plans. They also created a winding path on the steep hill between the house and the boathouse, based on a suggestion from a concrete worker. There was a big fireplace on the west wall of the living area, thanks to an idea from a stone worker. The fireplace was made of the same local stone as the house, and the mantel was made from a large mesquite log that someone had carefully shaped and polished. The beautiful dark red wood with yellow patterns caught your eye right away when you entered, blending nicely with the wooden walls in the living and dining rooms. The drywall was up, and the stone workers were putting the stone on the outside, while the tile workers were busy inside, starting from the back and moving to the front. Luckily, Deborah loved the tile choices as much as Joe and Sandy had, so they spent their time picking out colors for the painted walls, the blinds and curtains, the light fixtures, the appliances, the furniture, and the rugs they needed. While they were having lunch at a picnic table on the large porch that faced south, Deborah received a call. She happily answered, "Hi, my dear. How's work going?" "Sandy and I are helping Joe with some last-minute details. Do you need anything?" "I don't think we can do a video call here. My signal isn't very good." "No, of course not. I told you why I was coming down here. Why are you acting so suspicious?" "Because I'm right behind you, and I don't think you're really in the yard working on the wedding, are you?" Dan said loudly. She gasped, dropped her phone, and jumped into her husband's arms. "I love you so much. This is the best surprise ever. I just love our retirement home." Joe and Sandy looked puzzled, but Chris smiled knowingly. He glanced at them and said, "He knows her too well. He saw right through her story and called me. Now we have both consultants here. I hope they don't slow us down too much." Dan was not bothered by the changes. He was thrilled. He promised another bonus to the workers who had offered ideas and made those changes happen, and he said a larger bonus was waiting for everyone if the house was completely finished and everything removed from the site by July 10th. With both owners present, decisions were made quickly, and the crews appreciated their positive attitudes and the bonuses for finishing early. Chris and Joe handed Dan and Deborah the keys to the Jeep and left the lake house in their care. Deborah and Sandy had a great time working together on the design and choosing furniture, while Dan enjoyed working directly with the skilled workers for a change. The final tasks at the stadium were almost done, and the management had already said they would gladly accept the project once those were finished. At home, Chris, Pancho, Roberto, and a few others were finishing up under Joe's careful watch. Dr. Laurie and Dean Speck had approved the hours Chris arranged for his leadership at the site, and he had submitted his final paper in one class and completed the required project in another. As June ended, all that was left was for him to get passing grades in those two classes. Then he would earn his master's degree in architectural engineering. His vacation was scheduled to start the Monday before their wedding and would last for 2 weeks after. The second week was a reward for the support Chris had given to keep everyone working and healthy during the first months of COVID. While some employees had gotten sick, none of the cases traced back to the work sites, and thankfully, no employee or their loved ones had died. Chris did not know yet that his mid-year evaluation was complete, with feedback from the faculty at CU, his supervisors, and all the workers who received the evaluation through email. It was excellent, and his bonus would show that success. When he returned on August 3rd, he would take on his new role, which came with a higher position and better pay. Chris had never seen Joe's wedding dress, and he hadn't seen her since yesterday. She had even stayed with Donna after they returned from the fun party at Sandy's, which included gifts and fun surprises. There were some silly gifts and things Joe wondered if she'd ever be bold enough to wear in front of anyone except her husband. It turned out Sally was not the only one who knew funny jokes, and hearing them from Deborah and Sandy made them even more amusing. Chris's gathering with friends was not exciting either, as it took place outside at the kitchen area and involved his dad, his bosses, and workers who wanted to join. There was a small keg, but they hardly consumed it, mostly thanks to Pancho and the single crew members. He did receive a few amusing gifts, plenty of free advice, which was worth what he paid for it, and many new jokes that were sometimes cheeky. Now, on July 18th, he stood in the center of the gazebo with Father Joseph standing above on a platform that covered the hot tub's pipes and wires that would be installed next week. Beside him were Trey, Bob, Carlos, Ed, and Frank. As Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata played, the bridal party walked in one by one, starting with Diane, then Kate, followed by Sandy, Deborah, Sally, and Donna. They all looked beautiful, graceful, and in tune with the music. When Donna took her place in the gazebo, the music stopped. There was a pause for about 20 seconds, and then Dan walked in proudly, with Joe, a lovely sight in white, on his arm. Joe usually wore little makeup, but her bridesmaids had convinced her to wear some tonight. The makeup was simple, but the mascara and glitter eyeliner made her bright green eyes truly eye-catching. Her shoulders were bare, and the satin and lace dress fit her nicely, showing off her figure in a lovely yet modest way. It hugged her chest and small waist before flaring out over her hips, stopping just above her knees. She wore a short veil. Her legs were covered in white thigh-high stockings, and she had on white sandals with tall heels. Joe's only jewelry was a pair of diamond stud earrings, a ruby necklace, and a white gold anklet that Chris had given her. About 200 guests filled the lawn, spread out for social distancing, as Schubert's Ave Maria played on the piano and was sung by the choir leader. Dan looked very proud, but most people didn't notice him once they saw the stunning woman in white. At just 19 years old, and only a year and a half from her tough beginnings, she owned the moment. Her eyes were focused on her fiancé, her steps were graceful, and she walked down the pathway with a beaming smile like a princess. When they reached the gazebo, the priest asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" A calm voice from a laptop on the gazebo answered, "I, her mother, do." Dan stepped back to take his place as best man. They chose a traditional ceremony, and Father Joseph led it with confidence. When the time came, he paused and said to the crowd, "I must admit something. I jokingly asked Miss Kennedy for a musical contribution before I would conduct this ceremony. I know that wasn't right, but when you hear her sing, you'll see why I believe I will be forgiven. I now present Amy Jo Kennedy." Jo turned to face the guests and the laptop. She had worried about what might go wrong, but after hours of practice with the choir leader and pianist, she felt ready to face her fears. She raised her hand to signal the pianist to stop and spoke to the audience. "I think many of you know how we met and how our love grew from that moment. Mr. and Mrs. Ellison, Mr. and Mrs. Beck, and my wonderful soon-to-be in-laws, Deborah and Dan Alexander, all believe that our meeting was meant to happen. The more I learn about my husband, the more I believe they are right. When I sing, please know that I aim to honor the one who brought us together. I'm not a professional singer, in fact. I've never performed alone in front of an audience before. Yet, I want to offer this to him, in thanks and praise for everything he has done for me, and for bringing Christian Michael Alexander into my life." The pianist began to play, and Jo's beautiful voice joined in perfectly. "O Lord my God, when I in awe think about all the worlds you have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, your power shone throughout the universe. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to you, how great you are, how great you are. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to you, how great you are, how great you are." Chris had heard Jo sing many times and thought he knew what to expect, but like everyone else there, he stood amazed by her powerful and beautiful voice as she shared her praise. When she began the last verse, he felt a deep love for his wonderful bride. "And when Christ shall come with a shout and take me home, what joy will fill my heart. Then I shall bow in humble respect, and there proclaim my God. How great you are, then sings my soul, my Savior God, to you. How great you are, how great you are." When she finished, she blew a kiss to her mother and turned back to Chris. Their guests stood up together, showing their thanks with applause and cheers, and she saw tears in Chris's eyes. Looking around at the other men and at Father Joseph, she noticed they too were moved to tears by her song. Jo remained calm but squeezed Chris's hands and smiled at him. Father Joseph waited for the applause to end, raised his hands to the sky, smiled, and said, "Surely I am forgiven, Father." He then turned to Jo and said, "Thank you. Everyone here thanks you, and I'm sure the heavens above do too. That was simply amazing. And now let us start your wedding vows. Christian Michael, repeat after me. Amy Jo, repeat after me. By the powers given to me by the Episcopal Church and the state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Christian, you may kiss your bride." The reception line was kept at a distance, so they spoke to and thanked each guest from 6 feet away. This reduced the closeness, but it also meant that those who might have tried to kiss the bride did not get the chance. Chris understood it was tradition, but he felt that his wife's kisses were only for him. Pancho had a secret of his own. He owned a food trailer. He had traded some work at a restaurant for the trailer with friends in South Texas who no longer needed it. He used it to feed his crew when they were working in the remote areas of Frontera County. He was a decent cook, but the team he had hired for the reception dinner included wives who were even better. So the beans, potato salad, coleslaw, and apple cobbler were made by them. Pancho did smoke the brisket using Chris's special sauce and his grill, and it turned out very tender. He happily received compliments and thanks. Guests moved their chairs from the gazebo area to tables placed under strings of party lights and lined up to be served before returning to their seats. The warden who allowed Joe's mom to join the wedding let her use a laptop in the prison library during the reception. In her mind, Josephine, or Josie, was a shining example of successful rehabilitation, and she planned to support her as much as possible, while also recording her progress to help secure more funding and slots for the program Josie was part of. While her daughter and the wedding party at the head table enjoyed their meal, Josie had a dinner from the prison cafeteria. The story of Joe and her cowboy had been shared during a visit, so as the guests sang their song, she felt emotional and cried, watching the couple share their first dance to the music played by Johnny Duncan and Janie Frick. When Chris invited her to dance while his dad was with the bride, she agreed, and they carried the laptops with them as they moved gently to the music. Deborah held the laptop while Chris and Joe ran through a shower of confetti to his decorated pickup, driving off with cans clinking behind them. She promised to visit Josie, encouraged her to stay strong, thanked her for raising such a wonderful young woman, and assured her they would take good care of her daughter until she was released. Both mothers cried, but only one felt deep sorrow, understanding that her daughter's strength was in spite of her own actions. When she closed the laptop, she rested her head on it and made a promise to herself and to God that she would stay strong and be the kind of grandmother Joe would want for her children. The honeymoon was everything one would expect from two young people in love. It exceeded Joe's hopes, and Chris admitted he would rather be with her than in any faraway place. The ring on her finger symbolized their bond, allowing her to experience profound joy with Chris. They left behind a few things untouched, having enjoyed their time together. When they came back, they opened many gifts and wrote thank you notes for each one. Finally, they reached the last gift, a small, flat, rectangular box addressed to Christian Michael Alexander. He looked confused, wondering why someone would send him a wedding gift by himself. Joe also looked uncertain, but there was a small smile on her lips. She got up and stood behind him while he opened the box. Inside was an empty case with a label that said it was for birth control, with dates for June 10th to July 9th, and a note saying no refills. Surprised, he turned around and stood up. "Joe, does that mean what I think it means?" "It means exactly what you think. Since you are always so careful and slow to make choices, I made the choice for us. I'll be taking classes from home for a while. And you have a full-time job now. I don't want you to miss the chance to help with our children at night, so—" He picked her up and carried her upstairs, wanting to make the moment memorable. Deborah's Christmas Eve gift that December was a funny t-shirt that said, "World's Hottest Grandma" on the front. That got everyone's attention. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.